Right, this is going to be another episode of Summoning Insight here. Q Monty, take it away and ad read.
And this episode is brought to you by Liquid IV once again. Liquid IV has been great for me working out. It's an electrolyte supplement, but hydration isn't just for people training. It's about daily maintenance. So if you guys are in dry situations during the summer, airport excursions, talked about summer music festivals before. Are you hungover or potentially going to be hungover? These are great times to get Liquid IV. Like I told you, I've been using it in Muay Thai. I've been really enjoying like the yuzu pineapple caffeinated versions during my workouts. I've been actually giving some of the extra that Liquid IV has sent to my gym. People at my gym have been loving it. So it's been great. It's been great. Have
I like
you
the
been?
watermelon one. That's my
You like the
favorite
watermelon one? That's the
Yeah.
favorite one out of all the samples.
Sour apple one's pretty good too.
That's right.
All of them, if you don't know, because it's obviously like salty because it's got all the like electrolytes in. Normally, that flavor is going to be too savory, so you want the flavors that go well with salt. So if you think about it, like watermelon, famously put a bit of salt in it, actually becomes nicer, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, and if you guys, as we've said before, this is an excellent time. If you would like to support us, the best way you can do that is by supporting our sponsors. We are hoping to continue in the future with Liquid IV. So if you've been waiting, now is a great time to head on over to their website, liquidiv.com. You can either use it liquid-iv or just liquidiv.com. They both redirect to the same place, and use our promo code LFN, and you can get 20% off absolutely anything. So stock up. This is a great time. That's it. That's it, guys. You can get it. Has a bunch of essential vitamins in it as well. B3, B5, B6, B12, vitamin C, 3x the electrolytes of other sports drinks. Really great stuff. I've been enjoying it. And gotta say it, real people, real flavor, real hydrating. Grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or 20% off liquidiv.com using the code LFN at checkout. Thank you very much for supporting us.
All right.
And now we can get to our guest. We will reveal him after pulling the banner off of his face. Harris Peskin is here with us this episode. Harris is a lawyer with ESG. He represents many of the teams. And I think this is going to be the finale of our trilogy of what the hell is going on with the LCSPA shows. It started in the Four Horsemen. We talked about it extensively last week while the negotiations were kind of they were embroiled in the negotiations. And now we have the conclusion, which is that the LCSPA has in fact issued, alongside Riot, the changes that they are going to make. They were, I would say, relatively non-substantive at the end of the day. But Harris is here, and he cannot talk about any of the potential things that happen with the team. But what is great is he can talk about the results of what happened. And critically, he is an expert in terms of where the unionization of the players could go, and has a very deep legal interest in how the three-party problem, let's call it, the science fiction present, the three-party problem of Riot, the teams, and the players is potentially preventing a unionization or the extra complications that arise as a result of that. Is that fair to say, Harris?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly fair to say that this is an issue that we've had to kind of get trained up on over the past, several years. I wrote an article back in 2019 for the Esports Bar Association that discussed future unionization in esports and talked about the potential way that would look. We've certainly thought a lot about the tripartite relationship that you just mentioned, Monty, with respect to Riot, the teams, and the players, and kind of the mechanism that would need to the mechanism of bargaining and how that would kind of look, particularly in the context of a joint employer here, which I think is something that you likely have with Riot. And I know that's something that Phil brought up in 2 episodes ago on your show. So absolutely something that we've thought a lot about. That said, I wouldn't consider myself to be, this is a very specialized area of the law, right? Like, I would say that labor...
Okay. Nobody is an expert in this because nobody's done this before, right? With the 3 different entities. Is that fair to say? Or do you have an example?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's certainly been cases where there have been joint employers that are negotiating collectively bargained agreement. Like the most recent case, I think that was discussed in, I think it was a Browning Ferris case in California. It was discussed in 2018 in the context of some sort of a factory that had used a staffing agency to employ workers. But I think that really it is a unique situation, given that most of the time that kind of comes up in the context of factory workers or more traditional unions, not highly paid unions. Here, what you don't even have a union. You have a potential joint employer with a non-union, which then means that the certain things that would normally be available through collective bargaining with that union are not really available to you. You're not really collectively bargaining here. What you have here is a trade association, which is a 501c6 entity essentially, which is lobbying a joint employer who has the capability to impose certain rules on these teams. And they do this, and I think actually it is worth mentioning to you, Monty, and I know you're familiar with this. Back in 2020 or so, you had Hal Biegas on your show, and he actually described this to you in depth. But he made clear that the reason that they choose to be a trade association and not a union is because they do not want to receive some of the downsides that go alongside with unionization, particularly
salary caps. Yeah.
Well, there's something called the non-statutory labor exemption, right? And what basically that means is you have the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prevents you from conspiring to restrain trade, which is exactly what was used against the Blizzard Activision by the Department of Justice recently, right? And when you are collectively bargaining, where you collectively bargain for an agreement, certain things that would normally be prohibited by virtue of that Sherman Antitrust Act, they become permissible. So things like a salary cap, like a draft, these are all things that have been litigated in courts. Like there was a $1,000 per week, I think it was a individual salary for NFL football players on the development squad, right? Like all these kinds of things that are the product of a collectively bargained agreement, what would otherwise be impermissible become permissible as a subject of collective bargaining. So what we have here, just to kind of bring it all home, is we have a tripartite relationship with a joint employer, which has the ability to impose certain rules on one of the employers. And then you have an entity which is not a union, which is purporting to kind of act like a union in certain senses by trying to flex their power a little bit. And that kind of puts us into a very unique position. Now, I would say that you mentioned there's not many times that this has happened. It's true, there aren't really many times that this has happened. I mean, I've tried to do a lot of legal research on this to try to get up to speed on this. The most recent case I saw with the collectively bargained agreement that, like I said, 2018. But again, this is not too common to see kind of case law on this kind of stuff, particularly in the context of a non-union. So it is a bit of a rarer situation. That's a fair comment. Yeah.
And especially
by the way, what is the framework of what we're doing now? Is he just going to fucking answer a million lawyer questions in a row? In which case, why am I here? Like, just do it without me, mate. First things first. I would say this before we dive into that. Like, how about let's explain what the actual agreement was? Like, what did the CSPA and the Riot agree to do, Monty? What are the changes that have been made?
Yeah, so they didn't make any really. My opinion, and I'm interested in hearing your guys' opinions on this as well, is that they didn't really. This didn't result in any substantive changes, particularly because the LCS Players Association had very little leverage, as far as anyone can tell in this scenario, because basically Riot said, "Lol, F you," and we're going to cancel the summer split, and nobody goes to Worlds. So they basically threatened to take their toys back home with them, and the players. Helped by the ever helpful Double Lift, decided that very publicly in some cases that they were not going to basically comply with that. So I think after the players start saying in public that there's no way that they are going to miss the summer split and miss a chance to go to Worlds, and that they are not in fact very serious about withholding their labor, I think you lose basically your only leverage in terms of negotiation at that point in time. Obviously, the players probably wouldn't be paid in that circumstance as well if they were holding out and, not playing in these games. So the end result was this. And part of this was announced prior to the end of this negotiation. So, for example, what was announced by Riot prior was that there was going to be $300,000 for the remainder of the 2023 season to be split amongst the 10 NACL teams. Now, that's only $30,000 a team, so not very much money when it comes to running these teams that allegedly cost, $500,000 a year to run or more. 50% of all future NACL sponsorship revenue will now be shared by the NACL teams. Nobody's sponsoring Challenger League, guys. That's not Nobody's even sponsoring LCS. So how are you going to get an NACL sponsorship? God only knows. God only knows. Remember that Riot themselves lost Bud Light. They lost State Farm from LCS this year, and they lost FTX famously as well. And we haven't really seen any new sponsors for LCS. So how are you going to get sponsors for a product that we know nobody watches? Who knows? But apparently you have revenue share on fictional money. The NACL will have a team partnership agreement in 2024, or team participation agreement. So that's a similar thing to what the teams have with the league. Now, how did they not have this previously? That's a weird one to me.
Well,
you want to comment on that?
It was baked. I mean, there were requirements that were baked into the parent team's team participation agreement that they would have. So I don't know that it would be necessarily too different. I mean, I'm sure there'll be a separate agreement because there's going to be a different structure to the league now. But it's not to say that they weren't governed by some sort of governing document in the past.
But the implication is that they're not being governed by a governing document right now in 2023, which is kind of disturbing in and of itself. That this is going to take until 2024. That makes me a little on edge. A minimum of 30 days severance pay for termination without cause for any player earning up to 1.5 times the league minimum salary, and 15 days notice for any player competing on a visa. Now, this is big because what happened was when a lot of these players were told that they weren't going to be playing anymore, a lot of them were on visas that were sponsored by their work employers. And so it was really quite shitty for a lot of the foreign players to suddenly be, forced to leave the country or what have you. And having the termination 30-day severance is not a lot, and it is only protecting players who are well above the minimum salary, but that is an additional workplace protection that they did. This is probably the biggest thing that they got.
Yeah. And, by the way, I think it's just important for me to note at the outset that obviously my opinions are kind of my own. Obviously, I represent a lot of these teams, but I can't speak for these teams. I'm not speaking for these teams. I'm not going to purport to either, right? That's a really important caveat that I just lay out at the outset.
Okay. We got that.
I will say that this is kind of par for the course with how things have traditionally operated from my point of view in this ecosystem, right? You have players that will publicly complain. They will basically say things, whether on stream or on Twitter, and that results in Riot taking action in some sort of way to essentially impose some sort of standard that's then passed down to these teams. That has been the reason why they haven't needed to go ahead and unionize, because these players are able to exert their public power on certain fans and basically publicly pressure Riot to impose these pass-through terms onto the teams. And a good example is that $75,000 minimum salary. Benefits. This is now one of these other things here, right? 3-year cap on signings, right? Like contract length, right? Like all of these things are things that are typically the subject of collectively bargained agreements in traditional sports. You have a standard player contracts and a collectively bargained agreement. These are things that are negotiated for years in some instances, but it's just being dictated by the league operator, in this case Riot, because they're being pressured by the players, and the teams don't really have a seat at this table to determine whether this is fair, whether this is good for them. And it goes to show you kind of the power structure as how it's kind of how it's worked.
Yeah, and that's the major one. Continue. Yep.
Right, first things first, should we just bother addressing the entire thing with the fucking Mott and Bailey strategy you all told me this was about? So I was told this is about two things and it's a historic walkout. Number one, it's about Riot can't be allowed to lie to players anymore, right? Which one of these considerations stops Riot from lying to players? None of them do. What they did was they absolutely fucking marked out as pro players, and they accepted a voice. By the way, people use the terminology on purpose. A voice means nothing. That's like going, I vote not to get my head cut off. Oh wait, I don't have a vote, I just have a voice. Shit. Well, we vote to cut your head off. But it's nice to hear what you had to say anyway, the last word of the fucking damned over there. So already they didn't do the one main thing I was told the entire fucking Bailey was that they had to stop people lying to them. Joke is, they're probably lying to you still. And also, Riot lying. What is this, a day ending in a fucking Y? Then secondly, I was told this is historic because you know what? The players have shown the power they have, which is they can stop the entire LCS. And what did all those fans on Reddit tell you for 3 weeks? They said, if the players don't get what they want, which they still thought was the full reinstatement of Academy with all the old salaries, that is absolutely what people were arguing. It wasn't about moving and all that. Then here's what was going to happen, Monty. They were going to deny their labor for as long as possible. And you know what? Riot's just bluffing. They won't really cancel the split until people like Doublelift, who make more money than God every week, went, wait a minute. Every week that goes by, I won't be getting my... And then no worlds. Like, but fuck, my entire My entire like package was built in that if I qualify for Worlds, I get the extra 200. Oh shit, that's it out loud. Oh no, what am I doing? And what do you know? They buckled completely and basically just said, "Hey Riot, here's a handful of KY next time. Just go easy, will you? And kiss me goodnight." It's fucking ridiculous, mate. Because they didn't in any way, by the way. What happened to NACL? Remember, they were going to deny their spots. Remember all the lies people told. This is about people losing their jobs. There's people who've just signed leases. They're not going to make any money. Right, what happens now then? Where's their future? Where's their future going forwards? How did this secure that? So it was never about that. What it was about, Doublelift gave the whole motherfucking game away when he explained that he didn't agree to any of those demands. He actually actively disagreed with all of them except the one that had already been done in essence. And on top of that, he actually explained exactly what I actually theorized was what pro players would think of that. It's just because they thought it was a scene in a movie where they're the heroes who stand up and go, "I am Spartacus. No, I am Spartacus." And then they go, "Right, we'll start crucifying you then." Whoa, what the fuck? Like, I'm not Spartacus.
Actually,
I didn't
Spartacus.
do that shit. So in this scenario, right, they basically just buckled completely when they actually realized, like, this dumb fuck was saying out loud shit like, "Well, I didn't realize like cancelling the whole split was a possibility." That's what your implication was by doing a walkout, you cretin. Have you never seen a single lockout ever in a sport in your life? Sometimes they don't start the season. Sometimes the season runs 8-9 months. There was an NBA season. LeBron rung a fucking Mickey Mouse ring off it once. There's some of them that have started like the next year that missed the whole first part. If you're not willing to deny your labor, but all you did was essentially a protest. You didn't actually do a fucking walkout at that point in time because the walkout implies you won't walk back in. So to me, the whole thing was a fucking charade. Congrats to Philip Aram. He managed to get the dumbest people in the ecosystem, beyond you fans, you don't matter. The dumbest people that make all the money in the ecosystem. He got you guys to, for like 3 weeks, pretend you gave a shit. Then you got none of your demands. You got a little pittance, like Monty says, 300k sounds like a lot till you realise how much it is per team, how much the costs of the players are. You got a pittance thrown away and you were told you have a vice at the table now. And you went, "Oh, nice." And secretly you went, "Now I can start playing the only thing I'm actually good at in life. I've never even worked in a 7-Eleven." Because here's the thing I can't handle about this entire thing. In the end, how historic was it? It was historic how they just fucking bent over and just took it at the end. This is actually a disgrace that people were comparing this to like miners' strikes and things where like people have died in like work conditions in factories and people like all those cretin influencers like Hassan coming out like, "Seize the power." Like the thing I don't get about this whole thing, I'll rewind it to where I was before we even started this shit, which is, why is anyone obliged to give you a career doing something that's subsidized by better players and teams? Like, why do you get to play an academy spot and have a career for 70k or more than that, by the way, and be being chill and like, it was just stupid appeals to motion. Like, but they've lost their job. Like, the job, remember, the whole logic of this was that if actually academy made money, you'd never need LCS to do it. You could just say all the LCS teams pull out, anyone else want in, FaZe Clans, you want in, fucking, I don't know, Astralis, you want in, whoever wants in, you just come and run a team. No one would do that because it's a poison chalice. You get the PR, which is worth fuck all. No one watches the games. Even Philip Aram couldn't name players in the fucking NACL. He was making jokes about teams. Like, imagine that team being it. It's like, they already qualified, bro. Shut the fuck up. Like, the joke is, I don't watch Academy Law, so I wasn't even calling him on that. So to me, this whole thing, like, this is an okay starting point to have this convo. But you notice this convo is going to be an abstract. It's going to be about what can we do in the ecosystem? What are the examples? And none of this applied to what we're talking about now. This wasn't a unionization. I actually think the example of making this, I said this a million times, like it was on some communist angle of like, the workers are being exploited by the factory owners. Like, that's why I brought those numbers out, to just show that like it's the other way around. If anything, they are exploiting their employers, which is okay. I agree with the idea you can negotiate for what you want, but then I don't know how people can turn around and go, and then this team isn't giving them as much money as I think. By the way, classic communist move. You're just pocket watching someone else, telling them what they should do with their money. Like, what? Oh, but and by the way, same fans who never contributed a cent themselves, never put one penny in the pot.
I would say one thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Monty.
Go.
I was just going to say, one thing, Thorin, on that topic. I think it's really, a lot of people have basically said, like, look how poor and disadvantaged these players are. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year. On top of that, like, you compare this to traditional sports where players actually have had some problems in the past. Like, you look at Kurt Flood and the reserve clause that existed in baseball from the 1800s to 1972. You literally didn't have restricted free agency. Even in the context of current sports, If you're in the NHL, you do not get to be an unrestricted free agent until you're 27 years old. You don't get to pick your team. You're drafted onto a team, and you don't get to pick your team until you're 27 years old. In the NBA, it's 4 years plus a 1-year option after that, right? You're drafted onto these teams. These players have restricted free agency. They make far in excess of what the revenues are for each of these teams. We're talking, I mean, I've said this a couple of times, something like 200,000 I'm sorry, 200% of the revenue of some of these teams in many instances. You have max contract years. You basically go and do whatever the hell you want to do. You have a stipend, benefits. Like, give me a break. What's the issue here?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And that's the problem, to your point, Harris, about these players taking up 200% of the revenue of the teams. That's why there wasn't any negotiating leverage here. Because at the end of the day, two of the parties, Riot and the teams, are going to say, okay, lock out the summer split because we are bleeding money and we can no longer afford to subsidize your careers with venture capital.
Oh, the joke is worse, Monty. What you're basically saying to Riot is, I've got a gun against your head. And if you don't do what I say, you get to lose less money. It's like, oh no, I don't know if I'll be able to fucking live through the night. Like, they lose less money if they cancel the split. Like, the only reason, by the way, why that was even at all fraught is because Riot and the teams themselves aren't all one entity. In theory, the teams have other games as well. They still want the same sponsor. There was still some levers behind the scenes that could be pulled that were moving things forwards. But I agree, like, the idea that you were like really forcing them not to do it, it's like people didn't think that one through. And that's why I pointed out that thing about the scabs. There was loads of people who potentially would have played.
I mean, I do think that some of the teams, it was probably a kind of even split, I would estimate, among the teams that wanted the summer split to be kind of canceled because they would save money versus the teams that wanted it to move forward because presumably they would have not gotten their revenue share agreement from Riot had the split been canceled, which is, in excess of $1 million. And so if you are a team that is below, is spending less than $1 million. If you're TSM this split, and you're definitely spending less than $1 million this split, well, you probably want the summer split to go forward so you can get that revenue sharing agreement so you actually have a profitable team. If you are teams that are above that $1 million, you probably wanted it to be canceled so that you didn't have to pay necessarily the cost of your players during that period. So I would imagine it was kind of complicated on the team side between who wanted which outcome to actually occur. But yeah, I mean, to quickly go back to the end of these negotiations, so we have the whole list of the things that they got as a result of this. It says players and teams will share equal representation on a committee to determine future changes to practice schedule. That's because they went over to the 2 scrim blocks that some players like, some players didn't. So that's kind of whatever. That's basically just an agreement with the teams that the players have some level of control over their own practice regimens. Teams will take action to ensure all
I'll
foreign.
Go in a second. Keep going.
Yeah. Teams will take action to ensure all foreign players have mandated healthcare available to them by the first day they are in the U.S. Cool, I guess. Kind of surprised that wasn't there already. Riot, and here's the one that Harris needs to weigh in on about the lying thing, because to your point, Duncan, this is where they got about the lies, which is basically nowhere. Riot and the LCSPA will sign a memorandum of understanding that establishes meeting and notice parameters to ensure all parties are aligned before any future decisions are locked and communications are made. So critically, they couldn't even come to an agreement about how far in advance the LCSPA has to be told shit by Riot before they publish this letter. That is still to come in the future. So that is completely unresolved.
Yeah, here's the thing. They want a ticket and a seat to the meeting that will decide when that is, though, if they get informed. At the end, they still have no control, but they just get informed when they're fired. So... hey, that's like a parlay right there, mate. If they get 4 things in a row, maybe they almost get something, but not quite. By the way, one thing I just want to say here, because another thing, I'm so sick of people just blithely passing over. I understand you like watching Doublelift click the mouse. Why does that mean he gets to ask for more things when he is paid in literally money that never generates back the revenue of what he is paid? Like, when people say that, good, the player should have rights. It's not right. Rights are human rights or employment rights, you fucking cretin. We are talking about the law here. We're not talking about an abstract concept. So what rights does Doublelift deserve, right? Like, why does Doublelift get to have a say in how much he practices? Am I fucking mental or something? Why would he get a say in that? Like, remember, they're not violating like workers' rights, like making them work 24 hours a day. They're not making like some human rights violation. They don't give them food and fucking proper shelter and stuff. No, apparently Doublelift not only gets to get paid millions, he now gets like an equal say potentially in what the practice schedule's like, so that he can then go to Worlds off a shittier practice schedule. Because spoiler, yeah, this, you can ask Dom, players always vote for less games if they're NNA. If there's anyone who goes, I might have to go now, should we cancel the scrim block? Apparently they all go, yes. And the scrim block gets cancelled, right? That is the default in America. This is why I wish every pro player, you know, like they have that rule in the NBA, or not the NBA, it might be the NBA actually. They used to have one where they were going to make you do like a year of college before you could come in, because they wanted to, like, players, they actually wanted players to get life skills and be coached and shit like that, and not just be given the $80 million contract.
Right?
But another reason why I think you should have something like that in fucking esports is you should have to work in 7-Eleven for a year before you come and get an LCS job, because you are living in a fantasy world of what you think your rights are, what you are obliged to be given by people. And the fans are just idiots. Like I said, they just see their favorite player and go, he must be being mistreated. It's like, there's never any like basis to this. Notice how when I actually want to show things are full of shit, I come with facts. I come with real, like, sourceable data that I can show you that case. Everyone else is just doing like appeal to emotion, appeal to authority, what abstract concept. Yeah, but then what about in the future when they lock them in? Like, come on, mate. Like, there's nothing to this. So I don't even know why that's a thing. Like, why do players get an equal say? I've never understood it, mate.
And if I could add, you know, if Doublelift wants to have, or if players generally want to have a say in a lot of these things, they can have a say. They can just go unionize. They're not unionizing. They could trigger the obligation to collectively bargain with them for these.
Can we talk about that now then, Monty? Let's do that then. Because obviously another thing that was a massive problem with this whole topic was even industry experts and fans just kept saying over and over of Harris, like, just make a salary cap then. The same people arguing like we need more and this, they were like, just make a salary cap then. Like, the team should just salary cap then. Like, what are the legal ramifications around how you set that up? Why it couldn't be done in the past? How could it actually happen in League of Legends?
I mean, it could happen, but it can't happen until the players go ahead and unionize. We are not.
All right, Harris. So I was making this. I said this. So to your points earlier, just to go through them as we approach this topic. You know, the issue with unionization previously, part of it was that the players didn't want to be salary capped, because why the fuck would you? Why the fuck would you want to be salary capped? Like, let's pretend, guys. So as Thorin discussed on his video that you can find on his channel, which is true, is that a lot of the major sports leagues and entertainment businesses in general shoot for about 50% of revenue going to the players. And part of having a union is negotiating a lot of the time the percentage of revenue of the league that gets to the players. That's how salary caps are set. Okay. And so when a new deal comes along, so for example, in the NFL, they just signed this 10-year, $100 billion media rights deal, and that is set to increase the team's salary caps, I believe, this coming year. Is that right, Harris? Am I right on that?
So, I mean, I know that the NFL has obviously the biggest rights package. It's like $6.8 billion a year that they're paying right now. But generally speaking, what happens is you have the hockey. I'll take the NHL because that's what I speak in, right? You have hockey-related revenue, which is just the aggregated revenue of each of the teams in the league. Mm-hmm. Then you divide that by 2, because it's 50% right now. That's how much they share. And then you take the per capita midpoint for each team, which is just dividing by 32 teams, because there's 32 teams in the league. So you divide it by 2, then you've divided by the amount of teams in the league. That gives you what's known as a salary cap midpoint. Then you take 115% in excess of that. That's the salary cap ceiling, and 85% is the floor. So this is kind of the mechanism that you have to spending in the NHL, right? It's a hard cap imposed by Gary Bettman in 2004, 2005, after he kind of failed with the NBA in 1983. But like, basically what you have is a system where you cannot spend in excess of the midpoint, which is 115% in excess of basically 50% sharing. And the reason you have this is twofold, right? Because what was happening in the NHL pre-2004, you had, and this is the NHL, 76% of the revenue that was spent in the 76% of the average revenue of a team was spent on players in 2003, and that resulted in a couple things. The NHL was losing $300 million annually, right? Period. On top of that, you had teams that were going out of business, like the Pittsburgh Penguins, who had declared bankruptcy twice before that happened, right? And on top of that, parity was at an all-time low. But in terms of the actual, you know, the amount of like the point distribution in terms of who's the most successful teams, you impose this salary cap. the players are going to make a little bit less money. Yeah, it's not 76% anymore. In 2005, it went to 54%. Now it's 50%, right? But they bargained for that. And then the parity in the league actually went up, and the league actually started making more money because it's more interesting to not watch the Colorado Avalanche and Detroit Red Wings and New York Rangers be really good every single year. Maybe the Tampa Bay Lightning could be good. Maybe, just saying generally, right?
So basically, the point is that you are making a bargain as the players to maybe take less of the revenue, but in return, the hope is that you get longer sustainability of the league, and it's not a race to the bottom in terms of spending, and whichever really rich team owner decides that they want to lose money that season, or for a lot of seasons, because certainly very, very wealthy billionaires can just run this as a toy and continue to dominate the league over and over and over again, which reduces parity and reduces overall interest. But to the point here, this is the way that the leagues are set up, right? And so when you come into the LCS situation, now, why, the question becomes, why would they want to voluntarily enter a salary cap situation that was tied to league revenue if they were, in some cases, making 200% of the team revenue collectively as players? And the reason why
you could do it to help on the rest of the scene and develop any talent and keep all your friends jobs, and then you can make sure everyone has longer careers. You make sure every single team has a really good chance. All those things that everyone used to argue against the teams in Riot recently, that would apply to the players. Oh, wait, do the players have to give up their money? Should Doublelift vote? By the way, you know that a salary cap tomorrow means Doublelift never makes the salaries he's made now. He's the top one, so he immediately gets averaged out. It's other fuckers in other teams will get the okay money. People like Doublelift, when they actually have to put their own money on, they'll never vote for that, mate. They would be a fool to even. Also, I'll just throw this out there. This is where, I tried to do this a fucking million times on that Four Horsemen episode, but Philip Aram had sort of an agenda, so he didn't really want to have certain discussions. I tried to explain abstractly that you have to actually have a consistent perspective on this, and you have to give away your biases. Are you from a team perspective? In which case, this is good for you because you're a team. But if you're a player, that might not be as good for you. Are you a player in this sense? He wouldn't do that. He tried to act like there was sort of a moral component to this, and he was the righteous one, fighting the good fight. Here's why I don't understand this whole approach is, what is this? Is this WWE, in which case it doesn't matter if I'm the heel and Monty's the babyface and Harris is the fucking jobber, as long as at the end the show gets watched loads and we all make out, don't we? Because we all have a role to play and it's not real. It's just all a big show. That's what you want if you want pure parity and you want a different champion every year, like the NHL had for 10 years or something, right? That's how you get parity. But I'll tell you what, that's the opposite to what people want in a business, or just to see excellence. One of the reasons in European soccer why actually people like the way it is because if you happen to be the team that gets the billionaire Saudi owners, congrats, you might be winning the European Champions League next season. You might go from irrelevance to having the best players in the world winning. And then also, how about this? Is it WWE and it's one collective thing, or is it individual businesses? Because people have to decide, are these individual businesses? If they're individual businesses, then actually, if I'm Cloud9, why the fuck should I share revenue with the worst team in the LCS, which is what happens in the NBA if you don't know? If I spend more of the money I brought in, why do I have to pay a luxury tax as they do in the NBA to be the Lakers and get extra star play? Why do I have to do any of those things? So what you have to ask yourself is, which is it? Is it a league-wide approach? Is it an approach where we're being as fair to as many players as possible, but we're actually going to be very unfair to premier stars like LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, who would be on $100 million contracts if this was football, by the way? That's literally what the case would be. And then to be bid on, they'd get $200 million from the Saudis to go to the next thing. So people have to ask themselves, what do we want for the overall approach? You can't just pick and choose, not a buffet. You're going to have one approach, and then that's what we're going to try and implement throughout the whole scene for players, for teams, for the league.
Yeah. And this is the argument that I made, is that the players made a very conscious decision not to unionize years ago because those were the good times, because they didn't anticipate what are now the bad times. And so the bad times now, the other part of that is, as Harris mentioned, is that there's a salary floor in these leagues, right? And there is a salary.
There's a salary cap.
Yeah. And there's a salary floor now, but that salary floor is a lot less than the players would probably like it to be and could have made.
Just over the legal mandate, as far as I can tell, as well. We can't really know what they'd put the floor out otherwise.
Right. So to Harris's point, let's say, for example, he mentioned the NHL having an 85% of the cap floor, right? So it's 85%
of the cap of the
The
minimum.
midpoint of the cap, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So 85% of 50%.
If someone's a casual
basically.
fan, it's just so that you can't have Sidney Crosby, but then pay another guy $1 because you pay Sidney Crosby all the cap. It's just
Right.
essentially to ensure even the minimum person has to get like a close. It says 85% of the average, the mid.
So this is all to say that if we were talking about the revenue of the league right now, which the revenue sharing we know is a little bit over $2 million a year to the teams in the LCS, that would be saying that the teams couldn't spend, let's say, if it's, let's just put a number in there, half of the, 50% would be $1 million. And so 85%. So they couldn't spend less than maybe $850,000 on their 5 players on their starting roster. Like they would have to reach that threshold, which right now, if it's only $75,000 a player, guys, they can do what TSM is doing is literally just paying $375,000. So they could have negotiated for what was effectively twice the amount of money as a floor. And I think that's the issue here, is that now we have these teams and these players who are going to be forced to accept other contracts. But Harris, as we talk about this unionization thing, a claim that Philip Aram made on the Four Horsemen was that Riot said, and he couldn't give us the reasons why, so we will have to speculate, but he said Riot would fight the creation of a players' union tooth and nail, and he said that they couldn't actually become a union because there's no way they could outspend Riot Games in legal fees.
I assume you want me to respond to that. Listen, generally speaking, when you have a union, they're self-funded, right? They have certain funding mechanisms to go ahead and
should pay part of their contract to it, right? To fund
there
the
are
union,
dues.
presumably.
There are dues. Yeah, you got to pay for these.
The rest of the world don't really seem to talk about. You like to just go to a free meeting. Pay part of your salary, homie. Chuck in 100K. We'll get a union going tomorrow.
They could go ahead and do this, and they could go ahead and unionize if they wanted to. I think he's talking in terms of practicality, that he's going to have to fight against Riot Games. Yes. And you know what? I would say that there have been plenty of times in the history of professional sports where there's been a union, or there have been players that don't have as much money as the billionaire owners that go ahead and unionize and they fight. Like, look at Kurt Flood. He brought his, he was making he should have been making $90,000 a year back in the 1950s or 60s, which is basically but he was making basically nothing. The MLPA, which was created in the MLBPA, which was created in the 1960s, did not have a lot of money funding it. And you had billionaire owners, and you basically have these players who didn't make a lot of money because of things like the reserve clause, go ahead and they fought and went to the Supreme Court. And they basically just and they fought the baseball antitrust exemption in 1972, right? Like, there have been examples of players that don't have a lot of money in far less advantageous positions than what the players are currently in the LCS that have gone ahead and done things because it's the better thing to do for their fellow players. The reality is the incentive isn't there. There's no incentive. They can get what they. I really want to make this clear to your users. Players have gotten what they want by lobbying Riot publicly. They do this. They go ahead and they make a big stink. They go on shows and they do all of this. And then they force Riot, in some instances, through public pressure, to give them what they want. Minimum salaries. I know, Monty, you're talking about $850K being what would otherwise be the minimum. If you divide by 5, that's how many players are on whatever, right? Like, they could do that if that's the salary floor. But instead, what we have is they basically, a couple of years ago, they lobby, okay, $75,000, that's what the minimum salary is going to be. We want 3-year cap on that. No one, unrestricted free agency from the time. Like, you look at the NHL, when you're a rookie in the NHL, you have a capped amount of money you can make on a per year basis. You cannot make in excess of that. No matter how good you are. Connor McDavid made something like $900,000 a year. He's a top 10 player of all time in the NHL, right? Like, and that's almost as much as some of these players in the LCS are making, by the way, right? Like, they in some instances
make more.
Make more.
Right. Exactly. So, like, I want you to consider that they have been able to effectively lobby the game developer or the league operator for the things that they want without needing to unionize. Why would they unionize? It's against their interest. It's actually, think about how crazy this situation is right now. I am, in theory, representing teams, right? Like, and this is just my own opinion, but a salary cap is needed to stabilize this league.
Yes.
In that sense, a union with bargaining power is somewhat needed to stabilize this league because teams are spending too much. And you could talk all about how, it's their money that they're spending it. The incentive structure to make money in this league is through sponsorships. That's the only way that teams really make money in sponsorships. Do you know what sponsors want? They want viewership. No one wants to watch bad teams. Bad teams routinely get the worst viewership in these leagues. It's just a fact. People prefer to watch better teams. That's just how these kinds of things typically work, right? So then you're racing to get the best teams and spending the most money so you can sustain yourself through sponsorships. That's basically the incentive structure we have to make money in this league right now. It's ridiculous. So the entire ecosystem, from the way that revenue is generated to the way that it pools up at the bottom, and the teams are kind of just walked over in the meantime, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's not sustainable. Something needs to change, or this is going to be bad for forever.
It's also that the teams can't actually count on having a stable amount of money. I mean, one of the great benefits of having a salary cap is you can know approximately how much money you're going to be spending on your roster year to year, and you can create a business plan around that. When Team Liquid is spending $7 million like they did last year, and then maybe spending $2 or $3 million like they are this year, there's really wild swings. And like, how do you budget in these circumstances? And what a lot of teams do is they go to their sponsors and they say, hey, we can sign this player. Will you give me extra money to sign this player? Because it's going to be good exposure for your brand. And the sponsors say, okay, I'll give you an extra $1 million. Like, that happens a lot of the time. But it is really, really hard for the teams to operate as a business when they don't actually have a fixed cost structure to their team operations.
And in the history of...
go on.
No, sorry, Thorin. You go.
I'll give you the reason as to why. In some ways, it's also not in Riot's benefit to actually have a salary cap and to have parity. Because I'll tell you what will happen in the immediate future of creating parity and a salary cap in the league. You can no longer outbid the top European team for that player from Korea. You can no longer outbid China for that player from Korea. So he either won't come or you'll be stuck with the NA talent. Now, the biggest lie of all time was that fans just want NA talent. No, they want really good NA talent that's as good as fucking Koreans. Well, if we're all just making wishes from genies, I've got a few I'd go with before that. But, like the idea that if you just force people to take NA players, they'll ever be as good as Prince and Berserker is an absurd premise. Like, esports history tells you it's not the case. But I'll tell you what, if you can't pay the top dollar to Prince, maybe even to Doublelift. By the way, there's a world where someone like Doublelift, if they still had many years left in their career, if you do a salary cap tomorrow, he should just go to LEC and play for G2. Get a similar amount of money, millions of dollars, where they don't, because there's another problem. Notice people aren't examining. This is why I'm going to bring it back to Riot. People are acting like this is the job market in 1930 in their country, and they work in a factory, and not only can the factory not go anywhere else, neither can the worker. So the problem is they don't understand when you salary cap the LCS, but LEC isn't salary capped. Now they can just get out of control and bring all the good players if they want. So now your league gets worse. And then here's why, if you're Riot, you wouldn't want that, Monty. Because really, all you do when you make parity with a salary cap is help the shittest team get slightly better and have a chance to compete, right? But to do so in the short term, you will reduce the top-end talent, which, as Harris just said, is the whole way we're generating interest and sponsorships. And what does Riot care about more than LCS? Worlds, MSI. What do fans care about more? They say they care about LCS. They really want a team to do well at MSI. They want a team to go deep at Worlds. Well, that's going to stop if you initially have to make less top talent come. This is why every idiot, you could tell the people where the fact was almost poking into their brain and it was about to interact, because the way they would deflect it was they'd go, well, if the teams are having so many problems, why did they spend so much money? To make you watch, you dumb motherfucker. You're the guy that didn't want to watch Licorice until he made it to MSI, until he made it to the final of LCS. Before that, you wanted him out of the league. But when he made the finals and when he was at MSI and he looked like he was going to win a game, suddenly you were interested. That's why people pay top dollar for veteran names. That's why people import players. Because as Harris said, the whole mechanism right now is get eyeballs into sponsors, into money back, which, listen, we're still losing money in this equation, but at least something's cycling around. The current approach is this: if you want to make LCS more pirate, that's going to happen, but it's going to come at a cost. There's a trade-off there. Do you want a long-term future for the league? Do you want a short-term thing? And again, people aren't doing that. They're not saying, I'm in favor of the short-term solution. They're like, I just want all the good parts of all the systems that I could have, and I should have none of the bad parts. And then the fans literally are just like, just don't spend the money, bro. Just make a salary cap, bro. And like, say, there's no solutions here. We're not even actually getting to the abstract conversations here. So go on, Harris, what do you think about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that professional sports have kind of borne out that salary caps are the most effective way to kind of stabilize league revenues, and it's just a product of math at the end of the day, right? Like, if you're not spending more than you're making, then you're obviously going to be more profitable, right? Like obviously the league will flourish, and you won't have teams that are filing for bankruptcy, and ultimately that's really bad for the league. So I do think that is a place that we actually need to move toward, and I think it behooves a lot of these players to kind of look towards, and they're never going to do this because why would they? But to look towards the long-term future of this, like, is it sustainable to say that we're going to continue to spend in excess of how much we're making every single year? The answer has to be no. And so then something has got to give. And the answer is at some point in the future, we're going to have these serious conversations. And actually, this is going to sound really shitty to say, but like, I feel like I have to say it. Most of the times, unionization is the result of a certain worker being mistreated. And that is their response to the mistreatment is unionization. And so in some sense, it's almost like these players haven't been pushed enough to reach that goal where then they mandate collective bargaining. Because as you said, like, oh, they're playing too much. Oh, their work hours are too bad. They're not getting benefits. Like, these are things that you talk about in collective bargaining. Yeah. But we haven't pushed them that far. They're actually fairly well treated. And honestly, a lot of these teams are kind of, the players possess a lot of power because of their public personas and the way they could kind of use these fans against teams, and these teams make money through sponsorship. Remember, if a player goes after a team and the team looks bad in the eyes of the public, does the sponsor want to be affiliated with them anymore? Like, probably not. So then, it's a really rough position. And the answer is that I'm not sure we ever get there until the players actually feel some pain. And I don't consider what has just happened to be real pain. No, I really don't. Because when you look back at the amount of revenue that they're still making, as Thorin kind of pointed out, like it's insane. So if you want to actually get there, what's going to have to happen is the economics of the league are going to have to adjust to kind of the reality of the situation. They'll be paid low, and then we'll see what happens. Like that kind of has to happen for this to bear out.
And the pain hasn't come yet, guys, because the pain didn't hit the teams until after these player contracts were signed. I mean, basically what happened with the market was that when a lot of these player contracts were signed in November of last year, or the players are continuing on their previous contracts that they had from previous years, that we hadn't seen the VC market completely dry up at that time. We hadn't seen the advertising market, freeze their spends. We hadn't seen FaZe's stock price go rock bottom, which caused investor panic in the esports environment. So none of these things had really occurred yet. And so now, the teams are on the hook for a lot of these contracts. And that's why they are trying to get advances from Riot on future revenue share. And that's why they're begging Riot to cut the NACL teams, which triggered this entire mess, was because they're trying to stem the bleeding. But what's going to happen is future contracts are going to be very different, most likely. And that's perhaps when the players are going to do something and unionize. I mean, what's wild to me, Harris, though, is that in all of this, you would have to imagine that Riot and the teams would be the one in favor of a salary cap and hoping that the players unionize, and perhaps the players would be resistant to it. Yet again, to return to the conversation with Phil Aram, he claims that Riot would bitterly fight this legally.
It's not clear to me that Riot would want the players to unionize, because that's a headache that they have to deal with from a union perspective. It's beneficial to the teams because the teams get to impose a salary cap. What benefit does it give to Riot? It doesn't really give anything other than a headache that they now have to deal with a union.
Well,
right?
the argument would be is that if the teams don't, if there isn't a salary cap, that the league itself might bleed out entirely as owners continue to go bankrupt or fold, and then they wouldn't have a product.
That's called market correction.
Exactly. That's just called the market correction, right? Like eventually they could just bring in other owners who will spend a little bit less on in that theory. Right?
It actually takes care of itself eventually. Yeah, unless there's people with unlimited money, eventually you get someone who does spend less, and collectively the league goes down. The point is, though, that's not in the favor of the players, you notice. That's why, to me, the dumbest thing about this whole beef against everyone who wasn't a player was fans actually trying to put the sentiment out there that if you ever use a scab, we will hate you and your org and your sponsors forever. That is pointing a gun at one foot, blowing your toes off, and then pointing your gun at the other foot and going, you better not move there, homie. It's your foot, you idiot. That is the lifeblood of your literal scene, is the sponsor. If you go after the sponsor, there's even less for you all to fight for in the future. Then how about this? I'll tell you another reason why in the long term players won't do this. Because right now, if you're Doublelift, you're going to play 1-2 years more. You're not going to play a 20-year hockey career. You have no reason to care about the health of the league. You actually are incentivized personally to get out with the bag now. You are essentially part of a heist. There's not enough money coming in. You are going to get as much as you can and get the fuck out before it all collapses. And then also, I'll just throw this out there. This is also why you have to have people who know the law to even comment on what's possible. Because I saw idiots making all these observations. You know, the LPL has a salary cap, and in LCK, they've got this way of sharing the revenue. Right? I made this point on the last one. Just look up 2 words, chaebol and jichuan. These are basically like family-run approaches to businesses that own other businesses. By the way, spoiler, in America, antitrust would ram you up the arse all day long if you did anything like this. So those are countries that do not run on the same rules as America. You cannot expect to just port what they do like a blueprint, because what they already do probably wouldn't even work in America. I don't even think it would be allowed in certain cases. So they can do a lot of other that's why I made that point that, like, just let me know all those players who supposedly voted, all those Koreans, go home and give it a go, mate. When you get home, say you're going to do a walkout on the LCK. Let me know if you have a career, by the way, because also in your scene, they have infinite replacements. Their scab player might be better than you, mate. That's the joke.
Yeah.
And also to the point of the unionization thing, I think why Riot would fight the players union is because, as you guys are probably aware, if you follow the video game industry, publishers and developers really don't like unions. And if the players are successful in negotiating a union against Riot, well, some other employees at Riot might get an idea about unionizing themselves, which would be a massive headache for Riot. If all of a sudden, you know, their engineers or their artists or all of their employees were starting to consider unionization. We've already seen Activision Blizzard fighting the unionization of their QA testers very, very bitterly. And so I think that partially probably why Riot would be against having the players enter into a union and negotiate against them is that it sets a really problematic precedent for them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that kind of goes without saying that this is what happens here has the potential to impact the rest of their business, which is not, purely esports. It's primarily just they're a video game developer, right? Like they make video games and they have hundreds of thousands of employees that could just, all of a sudden bring certain things like minimum compensation, benefits plans, all these kinds of things that the normal topic of unionization would suddenly be forced upon them if this had like a kind of chain reaction. So I would say that Riot absolutely does not want to deal with a union, right? Whereas the teams, I would say that there are certain elements of this that could be advantageous to the teams. I'm not sure that how that would kind of bear out in collective bargaining, because to be honest with you, there's a whole added element of complication and how that collective bargaining even takes place in the first place, right? And this is more of a technical topic. I'm not sure that you want to get into it, but like, what if, if the purported union, or if the union basically goes ahead and tries to negotiate, what kind of say do the teams have in that negotiation, right? Like what when they come to the table, can they get what they want with a salary cap? Would Riot impose a salary cap after is it in their interest to basically make sure that gets into the final deal, right? Do the teams have any say in the final deal? Like there are certain things that the teams do have a say on with respect to what they can make the players do, but there's a lot that's dictated to Riot as well that Riot has control over by passing through certain things in the rules. So like things like IP capture of the players' intellectual property rights, that's something that the players and the teams are going to more directly clash on. But things like I don't know, scheduling for something, that's something that Riot is going to set. So the way that collective bargaining negotiation takes place is incredibly confusing, and it would that's why I said it's kind of unique.
By the way, I've got a question. The other factor that people are never bringing up when they use real world sports examples is why when Philip Aram tried to compare it to European soccer, which I could just tell he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about, because it was nothing like the example of the LCS. Like they have all those feeder leagues. It's been around for hundreds of years. You have an insane fan base that rapidly consumes the product, no matter what, even if they're from regions with bad teams. Like none of the factors applied. But one factor that is literally like, it's not just the elephant in the room, it is the room, Harris, is this idea that there's IP rights. Like Riot Games literally is allowed to tell people you can't even run tournaments in our game. In theory, they could come along and say you can't even play the game publicly as a performance aspect of what. Like at the moment, that's a wall that exists still. So how would that affect potentially unionization or something? Can they actually block these things? Is there a legal right in like America, for example, to have a union in some scenario like this? How would it work?
Well, you can't block unionization. Section 8 of the NLRA actually prohibits you from chilling protected union activity and forming a union. So that would be illegal. They could fight it and they could basically say like this was done improperly, or there's certain procedures you have to follow which you didn't follow, right? But at the end of the day, unions are protected. Concerted activity in America is protected and you can't really chill the expression of that concerted activity. So I would say, yes, Section 8 of the NLRA actually prevents that. Now, with that said, Thorin, you bring up a great point, which is that Riot controls the intellectual property right. They don't need to have a league if they don't want to, and they can prevent you from having a league if you don't want to. And by the way, I would just add here,
fuck this world, dude. Fuck this. I hate this.
By the way, Monty knows this because we once applied to like have like a tournament, and they have to issue a license and you have to pay a fee for it and stuff. It's not as simple as just doing a tournament, guys.
I think I was associated with that tournament. But no, what I would say is, like at the end of the day, what I would say is, I don't think being good at a video game entitles you to receive money. This is a business. We need to treat it like a business, right? Like,
it's just like, what did he say? The joke is he's missing you. Thanks for going on that episode, Harris.
Well, I really appreciate it. I'm afraid to look at your Twitch chat right now. I actually don't even have it open because I don't want to see how many people hate me. But the reality is, I don't care.
Our audience understands this, Harris. You don't have to worry about it.
Some people, I get shit for this on Twitter all the time, but I do not give a damn how good you are at League of Legends. If you're being good at League of Legends, does it make me money? I do not have any obligation to employ you. You do not have any right to receive money. This is a business. In any business ever, you are only as good to your employer as your return on investment. That is a fact. I will not employ you unless you make me money. This is a business. That is how it works. And I'm sorry to say that that's a harsh reality here. But like, you might have a dream of being an LCS player, and until the LCS makes money and that gets passed down to the teams who are employing you, I don't give a damn.
Because people are going to take that rant and think it's like an evil industrialist. Here's why it's not. Because the other side of that, if you were obliged to do that, is now I can demand you play for my team. What do you mean you don't want to play for my team for less money? But I'm obliged to have you play League of Legends for me and my team. And it doesn't matter that you don't have a profit motive incentive. Like, play for less. I want you on my team. That's why when people do this thing, you've got to figure out which side you're on. And actually, like, there has to be a give and take.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I Harris, obviously, ESG, the law firm that Harris works for, represents the teams, right? So, he does have a motivation here, let's say, because the team's profitability inherently means that they are able to hire
It impacts
Harris.
my business, for what it's worth. No, I'm actually serious, because if the teams don't make money, they can't pay me as well.
Exactly.
So obviously I have to disclose that, but at the same time, I'm just an esports fan. Like, I actually care. I devoted my life to the scene. I give a damn. So,
right. And your point is to the sustainability of the industry. And by the way, guys, talent-based businesses, whether they are, let's say, movies, music, sports, these are all the same talent industries. A lot of them shoot for 50% of the revenue to go to talent. Because guess what, guys? In order to run a sustainable business, you have a bunch of other costs that include, in sports, facilities, equipment, coaches, support staff, accountants, lawyers, marketing. You have everything on top of that, and you're still hoping to make a profit at the end of the day. And for the talent, which, by the way, are the minority in these industries, if you think about the number of people that a sports team employs, they outnumber the number of players on that roster, often by a significant multiplier. Right? It takes a lot of people and a lot of costs of stadiums, maintenance, all this other stuff in order to run these operations. And so when you think about it, 50% of the revenue going to the talent, in this case, the players, is a very good deal for the players. It's a very good deal. And what's been happening is that in a lot of cases, these players have been making 4 times what would be a sustainable business. 4 times.
More than that, too. More than that. Actually, in some instances, it's crazy. But like, yeah, absolutely. And just, Monty, to your point, like, there's multiple elements of a business. It's not just the players. Like, the New York Islanders just hired John Collins to run their business operations. This is a business. It's not just go playing hockey, right? Like, Lou Lamoriello runs the hockey operations. They draft players. That's great. But guess what? They got to put butts in the seats. They got to do deals with media rights. They got to get, RSNs. Right, sponsors, like, that makes up 25% of a sports team's revenue, right? Like, you got to do these things, and that means you got to run like a real business. So presumably the team, that actually the product on the ice, or in this case, the players, they need to fund that operation. you can't just spend everything you make from them on the actual, so it doesn't make sense. And to your point, I think that Thorin was bringing up the EPL and everything like that. I think a lot of leagues are kind of coming around to this. And Thorin, I'm not going to purport to be an expert on English Premier League right off the bat, but I do think that they're looking to move to a 70% cap on a team-related revenue, right? And I also do think that prior to 2000, I think they had financial fair play starting in 2010, where that was the first expression of a form of a salary cap, where you couldn't pay in excess of a certain amount of your 3-year revenue, right? Like I think you couldn't pay more than £5 million of your 3-year revenue, right? So like this is necessary. It's happening across all sports. They're doing their best. The NHL, the NBA, the NFL. English Premier League is even doing something like this, right? Because when you look at the top of the English Premier League, this is kind of just how it goes. Like the Deloitte for 2014, 2015, Deloitte did a financial analysis of the teams in the Premier League. You had something sustainable like Man United spending 50% of the wage to revenue ratios, right? But then at the very bottom, because there is no revenue coming in with the sponsorship, it's something closer to like 80 to 90%. And that's after financial fair play, and that's still not sustainable. So they had to do better than that. We're talking 200%. We're talking 3 times as much. So it's like, it just doesn't, the economics need to start making sense at some point for this to be sustainable. We're not there right now, and it needs to happen.
Also, I've got a couple of other points, like some of them tangential. One is this, which is, if people might know, the team that just won everything basically in the Premier League and the European Champions League, Manchester City, they are already in a massive investigation for the idea they've broken loads of these rules rather. Because what people don't realize is it's like paying taxes. It's the people who pay taxes are plebs like me and Monty that are like making enough that we get the attention of the IRS, and then we don't have like all the shit hot lawyers and the million fucking offshore accounts and the tax havens. So we can't get our shit and save the money. The really rich guy just pays someone way less than the tax bill to find a million different holes and crannies to get everything and get tax breaks. The same thing happens with these teams. Like if they can't pay you raw salary, they'll find a way through another company, a sponsor, to just give you a house or to buy something for your fucking son, and there's a million ways he can still do it. There's ways around it. That's why this is a constant battle. It's not even like you just unionize. They're like, right. It's like every few years, you've got to come back and redo it. You've got to check the financial, you've got to see what the newest loophole is and close that loophole, then close the next loophole. Finally, I'll just say this. People like Doublelift, here's the real one. Are you ready, guys? It's motherfuckers like Doublelift that mean this will never happen. Literally him. Because you know what? There's only 50 players in the LCS. People don't even usually have subs nowadays. They just have the 5 starters, and you have like an academy player or whatever, and you bring him in, right? So when you have 50 players, that means Doublelift, Bjergsen, Prince, these players carry enormous amounts of power right now, because as Harris says, it's just optics. You can only make Riot do something by making them look bad. You don't really have like a pressure. You yourself don't want to deny them your labours. You don't really have pressure. You can just make them look bad, and they might toss you a bone here or there. Well, in those cases, with 50 players, even the 5 biggest earners, they're a must-have if you want to get the public's attention. If they come out against the movement you do, you shit already. Where meanwhile, in the NHL, I looked it up, there's 1,123 players in last season, right? It doesn't matter then if like the biggest paid guy came out like, I don't agree with it. There's going to be 1,000 people who are incentivized to want these things for minimums and averages. It's going to actually benefit the most people. So the big problem also here is the scale we're working at is so different as well. Some of the same mechanisms won't apply, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also it is worth mentioning, the NHL in 2004, 2005, when Gary Bettman tried to impose a salary cap after he failed in 1994, the NHL actually locked out for an entire year. They actually denied their labor for an entire year.
That.
And they
didn't get paid. They didn't get paid.
Yeah. They didn't get paid. That's actually what they did. They took the step of not getting paid. And then, you know what? They came to the table and said, we don't want to do this anymore. We recognize that, the Pittsburgh Penguins are going bankrupt. You're losing $300 million a year. This isn't sustainable. Let's put a salary cap in place. 54% is what the players got. They actually won. It went down 22% from the 76% that they had been making, but they actually got something, and we have a sustainable system. Now, Thorin, to your point, of course there are loopholes. In the NHL, prior to 2000 and the last collective bargaining agreement, I don't remember what it was, but I think it was 2014 or so, you had paying bonuses, and bonuses did not actually... right, they didn't count against the salary cap. So there's
you can just give off the salary, the pay signing bonus or something,
right? And And what the Islanders owner used to do, his name was Charles Wong. What he used to do was he would say, "I'm going to give you bonuses that you can't attain, and in certain instances, those would be counted against the salary cap floor, so you didn't have to pay the certain amount of money, so we could skirt the floor." So there's all kinds of things that you could do in these kinds of situations. It's about making good rules. We're not even at that point. We're not even at the point where we're thinking, what kind of good rules can we have to have a good system? We're not even close, because we're not even thinking about this in a real technical way of how to implement this. We're too busy like screaming at each other about like, what kind of system do we want? The players are making too much money, whatever. And by the way, I would just add one other thing. In 1983, when the NBA was about to impose, when they first started thinking about the salary cap in 1983, the players threatened to strike, right? And the response of the Seattle Supersonics owner at the time is, "Good. I hope you do strike, because I don't want to pay you any money because I'm losing money every single year." And that's honestly, like, I think kind of it's almost like, okay, well, some owners probably feel the same way, because like you're just denying labor. You don't know what the hell you're doing right now. This is so disjointed. It's meant to make a public stink so you could pressure Riot, but at the end of the day, the teams lose, and they're going to continue to lose. And the only way this ever gets fixed is if we get real serious about actually how we address this ecosystem. What are mechanisms that are put in place in these kinds of leagues where there's an incentive to spend money to make money? And the way to do that is a salary cap, a hard salary cap like the NHL has.
Yeah, no, I agree. And here's the other thing that people aren't considering either. And to your point, Harris, about like, why do you deserve to make money playing League of Legends? Remember, guys, there's a very important thing here when it comes to the LCS players, which is this, that nobody has actually said. This is an open ecosystem. It's not that they're trapped in LCS, guys. If they're good, they can go play on teams in Europe. They can go play potentially on teams in Korea or China, right? If a really, really good player can do these things, we've seen it happen. China takes Korean players.
Bjergsen and Double have had offers in the past from LPL, I think.
Yeah, if you think about it, guys, Korean players who don't speak a lick of Chinese have gone many times to go play in China. Now, most Korean players speak better English, because that's what they're taught in schools a lot of the time, than they do Chinese. And yet, we've had players like Rookie, we've had players like Doenby become fluent in Chinese, Easy Hoon become fluent in Chinese, and be there for a long period of time. We've seen the Chinese teams accommodate these players with translators. You know what I mean? And certainly all of the European teams common English, and they could, if they are good enough, go over to the LEC. There are available slots on most LEC rosters. So guys, it's not that the players are somehow trapped here. It's that the players are fucking garbage in LCS and nobody wants them. Okay?
By the way, I
and
even
so,
made
like,
this
why
point.
are they entitled to a bunch of money from North American teams when there isn't a market for them? They are trapped in America. They're making a choice, or they're not good enough.
Actually, if you're NA talent, real talent, I mean, by the way, Cody Son did this. You can go and play in an ERL team in Europe. You can go and be in an LFL team or the LVP, which is the Spanish League or the French League. Like, you can go and play there. The point is, they don't want you, mate. Like, they'll take a rare person like that has like the fucking grit to do it. And I assume he was probably motivated. Maybe an agent or something reached out to some people. But the people just sit. Here's the real reason why I was so cynical about players on that Four Horsemen episode. Because I'd just done that interview with like Sven or whatever, and I know players, they absolutely used to laugh in the face of how stupid it was that they would get a punishment of going to academy where you didn't even have to scrim, and they were just chilling on 100k, living in LA, having the same girlfriend that liked them because they were in the LCS, just playing fucking video games on the side, going, lol, order some DoorDash or whatever. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, these guys actually used to just laugh in the face how stupid it was. And I used to just think, where do you think the 100k comes from, you dickhead? You're actually ruining esports right now. Like, you're not even putting in the effort. You're not trying to be good. You're not trying to be like waiting for my. Remember, academy's supposed to be like, it's like the guy who's like, I just want to make the NBA. Every day I go through 300 jumpers from every single spot. Like, my dreams. These guys were just like, fuck it, I could take it or leave it. Lol. In fact, some of them, and this is true, some of them chose to stay in academy on the best academy team. Like, lol, I'm winning, instead of go and play for the worst LCS team. When that happens, you have a broken system. And in this case, it was financially broken. By the way, just as an aside, that whole thing about the idea of like a lockout season and Doublelift realizing like, wait a minute, so if the whole thing never happens, I never got paid. I don't even give Doublelift the credit to be able to think that thought. I told you my joke, Monty. I think Lena just sat back going, I'll see how this plays out. And then when she realized, wait a minute, it's gone 3 weeks. Well, shit, they're going to cancel the whole season. She goes, honey, maybe turn on the stream and just give your thoughts, you know. What would I say though? I don't really know a lot about unionization. Just come off the dome, come off the top, you know, you're good at that. And then he's like, right, well, I don't know, shit, should they do this? What am I doing here? Fuck, shit. And they gave the whole game away to me. And that idea, by the way, you know, everyone was like, oh, I don't think he really wrecked the negotiations. No, because unlike the rest of you, we're not on the beginning question of the FAQ. Riot already knew all of this, you cretin. They knew they had no leverage. They knew that they had them over a barrel and could cancel all. That didn't actually ruin the negotiations. What it did, and I'm so thankful for it, as usual, Doublelifting Leader, thank you for your fucking incompetence. You have done a great service to the fan community because you just showed the fans what was really going on and where the levers of power were. And you showed the fans what you actually cared about. That, in the same way as he was talking about the fact that the main power of players is to make Riot look bad and then Riot does what you want, you made yourselves look bad and then just made fans that maybe they shouldn't get paid that much. Actually, why are we supporting them? It's like, you undid all your good work, you idiots. That was the one thing you had, actually. By the way, fair play to Philip Aram. He was smart. Just go radio silent when the negotiation goes on. Say nothing. Do nothing. You've already got you had the best goodwill you could ever get from fans. It was like maxing out the fan meter at 99%. And then this guy just came along and brought it back to like 50%. And then you didn't get anything you wanted anyway. You just got nothing. By the way, my last joke will be this. You know, I said there was that stupid thing that people kept saying. Well, when people pointed out, like, well, these demands are insane. In fact, some of them are things no one even asked for. Like, you're guaranteed a job if you win the split or something, right? When they had all that, all those idiots, you know, the old joke, the way the joke used to go when I was a boy, Monty, was this. They said, hire a teenager before he turns 19 while he still knows everything. That was the joke, right? Because the only place in the world where people know everything about the law, everything about finance, everything about raising children, everything about fucking like physics or whatever. It's just Reddit. Everyone on there is a genius. They know everything about every topic. So they all told me and informed me that this is how negotiations go. The players come in. We would like 100%. And then Riot goes, well, I will counter with 0%. And then they go, 90%. And then Riot goes 10%. And then at the end, they both meet like a fucking children's story on the WB. At 50% and go, nice doing business with you, and then walk out the room with a totally fair deal for everyone. Fair deal, right? What actually happened in your analogy then, guys, was the LCSPA came in and said, we want 100%. Riot said, I offer 0%. And then they said, well, what about 75% then? And then they go, how about 0%? And they go, how about 50%? Fuck it, we'll call it 50%. Call it a deal. And then Riot was like 0%. And then they went 25. And then Riot went, I'll tell you what, there's 2%. Now get the fuck out of my face and tell everyone this was amazing and historic and you won. That's right, dumb motherfucker. Tell them you won. And they did.
I would add one thing though to that, Thorin. Riot didn't actually give up anything in this instance. All that really happened is they forced the team to give up by saying you must pay 30-day severance in the event the players are cut. So they passed the buck on to the teams who then have to pay additional money in the event they want to make a roster replacement. That's really what happened.
Remember, Harris, the only people I'm told in this equation are greedy are the teams that keep losing millions of dollars. They're really good. They're really greedy. I don't know what would their greed be getting them. This is like a guy. He's really fat. He's just dying. He's got nothing. No, all his wasting away. Oh, it's not being so greedy. Like, what are they greedy for? I don't get it. Still, mate.
No, it's
they give us all for free for spending these money on these players. Is straight fire players like Prince who actually have a chance to win a game at Worlds. Like these greedy bastards. Your fans don't even know what you want. You don't even know what you want.
It's amazing though because the NLC the LCSPA basically makes these demands, these 5 demands that they had, they don't get any of them. And then the one thing that they do kind of substantively get from like a money perspective that actually matters, is the thing that gets passed on to the teams, the thing that is the 30-day severance, depending on the amount of money that you're making, which is something that's basically akin to saying you're guaranteed to be paid. There's now a consideration we need to make when cutting whether we're going to pay an additional, 1 month's salary, where in the past we might not have had to do that. And some teams might not have done that. So like, it's just another cost of doing business that's passed on to the teams that was achieved through lobbying Riot. The teams basically now accepting that, like, whether it's minimum salaries, caps on like all these things, just always benefits, like passed on to the teams. You do this, guys. Hey, go ahead. Like we'll make you guys do this, and then the teams fund it, and they're the greedy ones. By the way, I would add one thing, Thorin. You made mention of the fact that no one really cares about the farm leagues, right? Farm leagues traditionally in sports do not make money. That is just kind of how people don't really watch minor leagues. generally speaking. They existed in the 1930s because a guy named Branch Rickey, he used to be the general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, basically wanted a way to supplement the St. Louis Cardinals, which he was working for at the time, and made a minor league system. But back in the day, those teams, no one had a TV. You couldn't watch. You couldn't go watch the Cardinals if you weren't very close to them, if you didn't go to the games. So you would go to your local minor league team, right? You would go watch these games, pay them money. Once TV kind of became more mainstream in the 1950s, like those leagues stopped making money, and they only existed as a funnel of talent to the professional league. That's why they continue to exist, not because they are revenue generators. It is worth noting here that the NALCS is so garbage that you don't even want those players in the first place. Right? You go funnel from elsewhere. So what is the purpose of this league? I'm actually serious.
Well, it also has served as kind of a retirement home in the long term for players that are never going to make it back into the LCS, right? So it's not even serving its purpose as a development league because it's not for developing players a lot of the time.
Right. It isn't. The point of a farm league nowadays is not it's not really an independent money-making machine. It could be justified to funnel talent, but it's not even doing a good job of that because the LCS, sorry, I'm used to my 2016, right? Like,
right.
I used to work in Europe, right? But like, it's just so bad that it doesn't even accomplish that goal. So it's hard to justify its existence, and it's not a surprise to me here that the concession that was made has absolutely nothing to do with the Academy League. It has all to do with just making these players more money in the event they get cut. That's really what they got. They got more money in the event they got cut.
And also, to people who are curious about why Riot can pass these costs along to the teams, it's because Riot has to approve, because basically the teams can't play. They can't fuck off and make their own LCS because Riot owns the IP. So Riot can basically say, if you guys want to play an LCS, your contracts must adhere to these standards, and you have to submit all your contracts as a team. So Riot has all of the player contracts, and they check most of the time. Sometimes they don't. They should check that these contracts are adhering to those standards, which is why they can now say, LCS teams, all of your contracts have to have this like severance pay, or they're not approved, and that player cannot play in the league. Right?
Yeah, that's
so they have total control.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain rules that they are able to pass down to teams. There are certain things that the teams do have control of with respect to these negotiations. I talked before about like things like IP rights. Teams have, without being able to get too technical or too in the weeds here, like there are certain things that teams can do, but at the end of the day, Riot controls for the most part the entire ecosystem with respect to these player contracts, and what minimum standards they can impose through the rules, like we said, like a max contract year, minimum salary, benefits that are required. Like now there's a guaranteed severance payment that they get, right? Like all these things which are typically we get in collective bargaining agreements. We're not even talking about that here. They're just being imposed on us. The teams they're just taking them.
So let's change the conversation now to what the future might look like here, because Harris, from what you were saying, and I kind of agree, which is that the team's revenues are based off of sponsorships, which is true. And, the league's revenues are based off of sponsorships because Riot will not disclose the effectiveness of the marketing that sells in-game items to anybody outside of themselves. So we just don't know, how much money they're making off of their marketing exercises. So if the revenue that's coming in is sponsorships or is ad revenue from running Twitch ads or what have you on these deals, and to your point that the success of teams internationally and the teams being good drives viewership, how do you can you get out of the LCS death spiral that's happening right now, which is that there's significantly less viewership? There is no venture capital to prop this up any longer. So presumably what's going to happen is players are going to be paid less. And that means you're going to attract less good talent to the league, which means that you're going to continue to perform even poorer on an international stage than you were previously, which then means that sponsors are going to spend less money within the space. And we've seen, as I said earlier, sponsors leaving the space very actively, not only in terms of Riot, like I said, they lost Bud Light, they lost State Farm, but there are fewer sponsors with the teams now as well, if you guys have been paying attention. So is this a doom spiral for the LCS? Can you think of some ways that may be able to escape what appears to be a black hole that is just going to suck the LCS straight into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that first of all, I would challenge one thing there. I don't know that it's worse to perform. It's possible to perform worse than North America already does in international events. You think so?
They're beating Vietnam right now.
But yeah, it's pretty bad. So like, maybe they'll spend a little bit less, but to be honest with you, I'm not actually sure like there would be too much of a drastic change. I think that maybe they don't make the play-ins in some instances, but like at the end of the day, I think it's pretty much the same. I think that actually kind of needs to happen, to be honest with you. There needs to be a bottoming out, because there needs to be, as I said, pain inflicted from a salary perspective for there to actually be real change. And that is the way forward. There needs to be real substantive systemic change, and that comes from these kinds of mechanisms that we put in place only legally once they have a union. Things like a draft, right? Like that's actually something that is commonly used in professional sports. You gain the rights to this player for X amount of years, right? You could build a team knowing that you now have a Sidney Crosby under contract until he's 27, or a John Tavares until he's 27. Right? Like you could do these things, but you can't do that in North America because the players, they're just going to leave. And then it basically turns into, oh, I'm going to stay with you for a year. Now I'm on that team for a year. How often is it that one player stays on a team and actually like stays on there and builds that team's fan base up? That builds, and I think that's kind of one way I'll take this conversation, right? Teams in professional sports are able to generate revenue through a multitude of ways, depending on the professional sport. One is ticket revenue. One is merchandise revenue. These kinds of revenues, they don't really exist in esports for certain reasons, but I would also note that things like merchandise revenue, which should exist in esports, doesn't exist because there is not a true affiliation or a true fandom for specific teams. No one really cares about some of these teams, and it's because they haven't been able to build their brands up. And I know
team's fault a lot of the time. Let's be honest.
I
teams have been very bad at branding. I
won't challenge that. But
where do you get the money to build up the brand, etc.? Like, by the way, one quick aside I have, because I know this gets drawn into this. People always say for merch, made about 100 Thieves. People love to say it on the NACL one. It's the dumbest take ever. What about Disguised Toast? He can spend money. There's reasons why that doesn't make sense, because Disguised Toast is the brand. He's an influencer who has a fan base. Similarly, 100 Thieves comes from Nadeshot and all of his fans and all the people he built up. Jack from Cloud9 isn't a brand himself. The players who play for him are. So he has to pay top dollar for the players. And then, spoiler, because it's an open market, they go elsewhere. Someone else gets an offer, like Impact gets an offer for $1 million, so he leaves. Like that, you can't build up Impact fans there. So It's not as simple. People have got to stop doing this. When you yourself don't know an area, you can't go, I don't know, figure it out, bro. How the fuck? You can't figure it out. You don't know the market dynamics. You don't know the variables. All of these areas are incredibly complicated. Do you think the owners are sat around going, we're losing 170 million on salaries? I never thought of a way we could change it. Shit, just keep doing it the same way. Why is everyone on Reddit smarter than everyone else in the world? You're not. You're 18 years old and you've never experienced one of these fields. Like, there's a famous saying, right? I'd apply it in this case where they say that, like, wise men argue cases, fools decide them. Like, you don't even know what all the arguments are or why something is the way to. So grant that Cloud9 and teams that bring in all these millions in salary and sponsorship, rather, know something about the industry, understand some of the mechanisms, and that sometimes it's not possible to just pivot on a dime and put money elsewhere.
And one of the things that I, do at ESG, this is kind of what my primary thing at ESG is. Like I work mostly on sponsorship agreements in the industry. And so the teams that we represent, I'm generally, if they're doing a sponsorship agreement, that's kind of what I'm doing. I would note that, things like conversion rates, that's a really important thing for a sponsor, whether you're converting, that impression into a consumer of your product or a click on your website or interest on that website, right? That isn't necessarily as high because these esports teams don't have the ability to kind of drive that conversion the same way that influencers typically do, because influencers typically have all the fandom and they are the ones that the players really care about. What I'll say is, like in traditional sports, like in 2000, I think it was 2022 in Europe, the English Premier League, roughly 30% of the revenues that was generated was from sponsorship revenue, right? But if that sponsorship doesn't actually have if the sponsor doesn't have a reason to be affiliated with your team anymore because you're not driving conversion because your fans don't really care about your team, well, then why is he going to continue, or why is that sponsor going to continue to be affiliated with your product? They're not going to be. So you have to actually be able to generate fan bases. That is what the future looks like. But when you have such an unrestricted when you have such a mechanism of unrestricted free agency where you could just go on a team for a year and you leave and go to the next team, right? And the next one that's paying you the most money, it's very difficult to build up that brand, to build up. Like when I grew up as a New York Islanders fan, I loved Pierre Turgeon. He was kind of my guy. Like even recently, John Tavares stabbed me in the freaking heart, but I love John Tavares. He was with the team from 2009 until 2018, right? Like, but he defined the New York Islanders. I was a New York Islanders because I watched him. They had a core of players that I really cared about. That doesn't exist in esports. In very rare instances does that exist, but it needs to exist because you need to be able to build up that fandom, the association with that team. But because of the mechanisms of movement with these players, it's very difficult to even do that. And I remember when I used to work on the team side of things more directly, because I used to work for a team specifically, like we would have these agents like, we're not going to sign more than a 1-year deal, right? Like, well, okay, well, what are we supposed to do with that? How do we build up your brand and your affiliation with the team? How do we make a story out of that? We can't really do that. It's impossible for us to do that. So like, you're basically just coming, taking the salary and then going to the next highest bidder. But the rules are drafted in such a way with Riot where it permits that. They want that is by effectively creating that cap on the number of years. That's what the market dictated for such a long time, and we don't have these things to save us, like a draft with restricted free agency, which is basically exists in almost all North American sports leagues.
And if you guys want proof that this works, look at T1.
Right.
T1 is as popular as they are because Faker has been the face of that organization for 10 years. Right. There's really strong affinity with the fans. Right. Because of the through line of that team.
And I would note there's other ways to do it too. Like I've talked a lot about the New York Islanders, right? But I'm a New York Islanders, New York Mets, New York Jets fan, right? New York is the commonality here. I know that Monte, you tried to do this with the Detroit Renegades, right? Like I think that this is. I mean, it sounds silly, but the reality is people are tribalistic. They care about their regions. They want to represent those regions. Whether that can exist in esports is not. I don't know, but like that is one way to generate fandom and then to convert that sponsor, to get that ticket sales, to have those watch parties. Like I live in New York City, right? It's amazing to me. It is actually amazing to me that no one has tried to capture and be that New York City team, because I will go to a watch party down the street at the local LAN bar and there'll be 200 people at that LAN bar watching the game and watching the LCS. This Friday when the LCS is going to be on at Brookland, right down the street from me, there's going to be 200 people there. And yet no team is really actively diving into that way to generate this fan bases. And these are ways that we need to activate to make this more sustainable.
Yeah, and I will say, like, obviously the example that people will give is Overwatch League, but Overwatch League never executed on its goal of having the homestands and trying to activate those audiences, and we can debate whether that would have been successful or not. But one thing that has been successful at the very least is a lot of, grassroots fighting game stuff.
Yes.
has had a huge East Coast versus West Coast.
Yes.
Component to it, and fandom of East Coast players versus West Coast players. And one thing that, by the way, guys, I have been saying for probably 7-8 years now is I have always been mystified why Riot doesn't open a second studio on the East Coast, have split the teams into 2 divisions, and have an East Coast versus West Coast team rivalry.
Right. And I think that, by the way, your Smash example is such a good example, because I look at players like Mango and I look at players like Hungrybox, and back in the day, like if you were from California, you were a Mango fan. Like there existed this hardcore rivalry between the West and the East Coast. It's not to say that regionality, you cannot develop an affinity for regionality because it happens to do with video games, right? Every single Sunday, I used to go to my LAN bar. They have a tournament for Smash. I play Smash Ultimate, in these tournaments, right? Like, but you have these players that are routinely there that are at all these tournaments, and you care about them because you get to play against them. You develop friendships with them. It's a grassroots thing. You build from the grassroots up. That is the mechanism by which that player then goes to a regional, or he goes to, a major. You care about that player. You want to see that player succeed. And so because you've kind of developed the relationship, or you've been in the same place as that player, you're rooting for that player because he dominates your locality. Like that's actually one thing I think that is really done well by the fighting games community. And I think that ultimately should probably be seen in some way in esports. So yeah, I think that, in terms of generating fandom, like that is one way that this gets solved, as well as the systemic changes. And these could all, a systemic change could happen through a collectively bargained agreement like that. We could fix some of these issues like that. We don't fix these issues because the incentives aren't there. The other things that requires building. But I will note one thing, Monty. Even if we generate more money, even if we're pulling in more money into this pile, it does not change the fact that if sponsors are going to pay us a lot more money, it doesn't change the fact that the incentive structure still exists to funnel that money out to the players, like and then to keep this going. No, I'm serious, because if you look at things like the English Premier League, right, like look how much Man U spends on all of its players compared to the bottom tier teams. They sponsors gravitate to Man U because they know they're going to be successful, and because Man U could outspend all of these other teams, right? And so even if they're generating a ton of money, they're still going to funnel all that money in to outspend all the other teams to maintain their spot at the top. That dynamic is not going to change unless we have some sort of an external mechanism.
So do you have any kind of solutions to these issues as we look forward? Because like obviously it seems like on an eventual timeline, the players are going to have to unionize if they want to set more reasonable salary floors for themselves.
Yeah, I think that I think that, again, I think the players will need to feel pain at some point to eventually get to that unionization state. And the market will need to correct itself. And then when it does, there will hopefully be some sort of action that is taken to move towards a more sustainable league. I mean, the NBA in the 1983s was not sustainable either, right? Like there was a period of time in the late 80s when the NBA was being run on tape delay to watch a finals game. You literally didn't even watch it live because it wasn't interesting enough television, right? Like it's progressed a lot since then. Once we stabilized the league, more parity, we've brought additional interest into it. But like, yeah, there needs to be a bottoming out from a financial perspective. There needs to be pain felt by these players, and there needs to be systemic changes from the top to the bottom. It's not clear to me that just injecting more money into the scene is ever going to reach that level of stability because the revenue incentive structure is just so misplaced. If the incentive structure is just to spend so much money every single year to remain at the top, then people are going to routinely claw to be at the top. It just makes sense that way. So you need to have some sort of mechanism to prevent that kind of thing. And by the way, I would note that sorry, go ahead. I don't want to.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, like, you look at other sports leagues, like, again, I don't watch football, soccer, but I have had to read a little bit about it just to kind of, understand what I'm talking about when I'm trying to structure these leagues, because it is something that I have had a role in doing. Like, what you do have is you have systems where the top teams win a lot of the times, and there's not much parity across that. Like I think Bundesliga has had 5 championships won by the same team since like the 1980s, something like La Liga, even less. I think it's 4. So like it doesn't work. And I don't want to say it doesn't work. The models work for some of the teams, but like if you're trying to make a more expansive team with parity, this is kind of how you would have to do it. Systemic change. And I think that these soccer teams are kind of realizing that now too, by the way.
Well, the thing is, the bottom ones are the reason why the reason why Philip Aram using the soccer one was a terrible example is because one of the reasons why the biggest teams in Spain, Italy, etc. Here's a detail you probably don't know. I bet Monty doesn't know this. It's not a diss to him, it's about European soccer. Monty, do you know the guy who just died, the former prime minister or president of Italy, Berlusconi, just died, very famous guy. Simultaneously to being the president or whatever, he also was like the chairman of AC Milan, one of the biggest clubs in all of Italian football. Can you imagine the level of corruption that could have been going on behind the scenes?
I mean, he was kind of famously corrupt, though. So.
I mean, that's the point I'm making is that's one of the reasons why these big dogs never get taken down. In Italy, I remember in Spain, there was once a story where Real Madrid, because these teams were all going mega into debt to buy all these superstars every season, like I think the government of Madrid just agreed to buy the old ground of Real Madrid, which wouldn't even have much benefit to them. It's just an old ground, and then just gave it back to them for free. So what you had is literal government corruption prop up the giant teams. And the reason why is because in the short term, they bring all the tourism. They bring all the people from the city. So the problem is, again, you have to ask from what perspective are we looking for fairness? What is fairness? Who are we trying to help? If we're trying to help the little guy, by definition, that will be against the interests often of the big guy. Yes. So the other thing I'll say is this. To me, I think there's 3 ways immediately that you can actually start to make more money or you can increase the revenue. But no one's going to like any of the 3. So one of them, Riot is going to hate and they're not going to do it, is Riot could create some sort of a system whereby teams get people, activate their fans to buy items in the game that are cut off, goes into either the LCS or the teams themselves. Now, why would Riot do that? Because as Riot just taught all you pro players, if they don't have to, look, they'll give you a little something just to make the pain go away of the bad PR, but they don't really have to give you any of the power. Why would they? They're an autocrat. They have complete power right now, especially because you don't use legal mechanisms like unionization. So you could have Riot do it, but spoiler, that one's not even a plausible one. The other 2, the fans are going to hate my second one. We could have pay-per-view tomorrow and we could start making some money. But the problem with that is the teams technically don't want that because in the short term, the pay-per-view revenue won't make enough to make up for the amount of viewership that will go down. That will mean the sponsorship goes down. So the teams and the fans don't really want that one. And then the third one is one that in theory everyone could want, but not this month. You have to pretend this month you don't want it. And that's you can have Saudi Arabia and Qatar and fucking and the United Arab Emirates. They can all come in just like they have in European football and they can fund all of this for us. And in exchange for it, all we do is sell our souls and our principles. And in exchange for that, we can have a really good fucking game of sports ball. Sorry, I meant video games. We can have people like Doublelift get paid a king's ransom, as he says there, more than literally all-time great hockey players get paid right now, for him to be the 97th best player in the world. And I'm being generous when I say that. Spoiler, there's 100 Koreans are better than him. So to me, these are all three options we can start with tomorrow. But notice there's going to be no consensus from the industry to pick one of these. And along the way, someone's going to get the short end of the stick. So the problem is, like, there are solutions. The problem is who's willing to feel the pain. Who's willing to feel the pain?
There's definitely ways to make more money in this scene. And I think that, to your point, Thorin, like, I think that it's a great point. Like, we could share in additional digital items, right? Like, I think Riot actually in its interview, I can't remember who they did this with, but they basically talked about, the fact that their top sellers are world championship skins. And that's some of the biggest digital items that they sell. They could obviously go ahead and do that, for other digital items.
But Harris, they don't get 100% of that money.
Well, yes, if it's specifically rated for the LCS, that's correct. And it would, in theory, it would dilute their other earnings, right? Because if people are spending on that, then they're not going to spend on other things. They might not have an incentive to that rev share.
Yeah, they would be losing money because they don't get 100% of the revenue of the thing that they are making.
Right, and Riot has revealed that there's a split of 50%, and so that's not that's public information at this point. So, like, I think that I can say that, but
you can. That's public.
Yeah, but I would know that obviously it's dilutive. It has a dilutive effect in the event that they basically go ahead and share that revenue, because then there's the money that you as a consumer are going to spend. You're not going to spend that on a different item that they have 100% of the revenue on. So they might be incentivized to go into it's a math equation for these people, right? But I would also note that even if you are injecting more money into the scene, as Thorin notes, it's not there's winners and losers. It's not clear to me that with the additional infusion of that money, that it doesn't all just pool at the top, or it doesn't pool for the most popular team at the time, and it's not great for the low teams that have low viewership, that don't have those fan bases, right? And there is no kind of revenue sharing structure amongst these teams right now. So it's certainly possible that there will be teams that win more and teams that win less. Or if there is a revenue sharing structure, like, it's also not clear to me that there wouldn't just continue to be more grabbing for those top players. Like, you still want to spend that money. That incentive structure still exists, where you're still going to want to spend for that top player to make your team more popular. So without some sort of mechanism coming down from the top, and this has been experienced in professional sports, even when the NFL is drawing in massive amounts of money, they still have a salary cap. I think it's like 48% right now is what the players make in the NFL. They still have a salary cap because they want to have that mechanism coming from the top to limit their own incentives to spend, because the incentive to spend will always exist. And that is why these professional sports leagues in North America have almost unilaterally, with the exception of the MLB, which has a soft salary cap, they've all adopted in some form or another this kind of a cap.
Also, by the way, you have to remember, think of owners in a lot of the sports. A lot of the American sports are billionaire owners who buy it as a plaything. They buy the team to win the league because, lol, my friend has a team, I want to beat his team. Or I just think it would be cool to be an NBA champion. That guy doesn't want salary caps where it's like, oh, wait a minute, he maybe does in the short term because he doesn't have to pay a superstar in the NBA when it's developed now. But in the old days, he might not want it, because then it's like, what, the parity? So I actually have to be really good at GMing and scouting and coaching. Like, fuck, I just wanted to spend money. I wanted to buy a championship. Like, that's the reason why, again, there's always going to be different interests in these leagues.
And just as you said, Thorin, like in the 1980s with the NBAPA, you actually had the NBA negotiations. You actually had something called the Larry Bird exception, which is you could spend above the salary cap if you want to retain one of your players, because the Boston Celtics wanted to retain Larry Bird, right? So, like, you actually have all these exceptions that get built in to kind of moderate that interest, which is a super interesting thing. But no, I do think that is something that would be beneficial to the league in the long run. And I think that is something that we kind of need to get to. And that's been my personal point of advocacy for quite some time on this topic. And that's all I would say.
Well, I mean, this all sounds like, based on what we've seen, nothing is going to improve in the short term. And that basically, like, we're going to be looking towards probably next year at the very earliest for any of these things to substantively change. And that, the LCS is probably going to get worse in terms of performance, viewership, payment, revenue, everything, before it can actually settle into a place where it might have a shot.
Go and look at the lineups of the teams where some of the teams still haven't announced fully all the players being played because they're probably swapping some of them in and out. Like, the dumbest thing about all of this was because the players and the fans got so rah-rah that this was their moment to strike. I told you this on that fucking Someone in Insight episode with all the guests. You picked the worst moment in the history of the league to do it, you dumb motherfuckers. You picked the time when no VC available, no good ad market, and everyone was losing the most money. That's when you chose to strike, right? Except here's the problem. In this scenario, you're now going to end up in a situation where the league is what you actually exposed was how bad the condition of the fucking ecosystem is. What you actually exposed is there's a reason why teams will actually probably leave in the next year or two, some of the big names. So it's all well and good having these big conversations, but actually in the short term, it's in trouble and not for the players, quite frankly. It's going to be when there's no money to pay them, but yeah.
And I might get in trouble for saying this, but I would also note that there is a benefit to having a strong players association, because if ultimately that the teams do want some sort of a union, or they do want some sort of a salary cap, you need to have that, right? There needs to be that collective bargaining to take place. But the LCSPA has kind of just shot itself in the foot because they've revealed that they're kind of weak and that their players don't actually care about these kinds of things. And so how does that impact negotiations on a go-forward basis? Is there actually a chance that they could ever actually unionize? Do they have that kind of interest amongst the players? They literally just walked out to get 5 things, they got none of them, and and they came back because they didn't want to stop playing because they realized, oh wow, we might not actually make money. I mean, that's really what happened, right? Like, oh wow, we're not going to make money. Oh, I think I'd like to actually play, right? Like, but what does that say for the future of the LCSPA? And that's actually a bad thing. Like, the LCSPA needs to be strong in the future if we're ever actually going to get to a place of substantive strength for my partner, Bryce, he wrote a paper on this once. He basically said that the future of collective bargaining will look like the players and the teams kind of coming together to negotiate against Riot, and they will, against the game developer. That kind of thing actually, I do agree that needs to happen in some sense, but it can't happen with an LCSPA that's walking out because the NACL is no longer in existence because there wasn't financial reasons to have it in existence, and that they're still making a ton of money without real incentive to strike. Like, it was a complete waste of time. They picked. I think they picked the wrong moment to die on a hill.
The reason why that was so dumb to me is this, Harris. Right? If it was actually a thing where you had a job and you were being fucked over and exploited, you, the academy player, would be doing a walkout to change conditions. The pro players in the LCS did a walkout, not for their job, for their pal who plays in the Academy League. What? Like, that never even made any sense to me. Like, I never even understood from the first place, not least because it was never sustainable. And the joke is, the worst thing as well was people like Double F admitting that it's not sustainable and they shouldn't get paid that much, and it never made any sense. Like, so what was it all for? I'll tell you what it was all for. The dog poet society moment where Philip Aran got them all to stand on a desk, but he still got fired. But in real life, he didn't get fired yet.
Yeah, I want to comment on Phil. I think, we obviously have a good working relationship and we need to maintain that. But I think that, like, what I would just say is that I do strongly believe that the LCSPA needs to be a strong bargaining unit in the future. And I worry that right now it is not going to be capable of doing that because of the kind of weakness that might have just been exposed. And so that is actually a concern of mine. And
I disagree with that because the weakness exists whether you expose it or not, and I would contest that the weakness is very evident even without them walking out. Like, we know who has the power and the control in the situation. We know that the players have been the major beneficiaries as far as we can tell, because again, we can't know how much Riot's benefited because we don't know those numbers. But I think proportionally, the players have been the biggest beneficiaries. If I had to guess,
Monty, this is a pure guess. I haven't asked pro players this. I think the players have actually ensured they won't ever do this again.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They themselves, Monty, didn't know the numbers I revealed. They didn't know how much was being lost. They all stupidly didn't even factor in things like housing costs and all the other things. Like, remember, they have all these extra things that normally contractors don't even get. Like, so to me, I actually think pro players now realized, holy shit, I didn't realize the league was that big a trouble. What do you mean the teams might leave? I think now they've actually undercut essentially the one thing they had, which was essentially like solidarity and confidence in each other. Like, we can join together and fight for it. I think they realized, holy shit, wait a minute, I tried that with the academy. Fuck, I'm not doing it with my job. Like, I think a lot of pro players, because like I said earlier, they're not going to have a 20-year career. They're probably going to play 3 or 4 years unless they're an extremely rare individual. So their point now is, maybe I should shut up and play for 3 years. That's almost the vibe I get.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, where's there any players saying anything? Am I missing something? It was already done. The historic thing happened, Monty. Where are all the players on Twitter? Where are all those guys? Where's Vulcan? Where's Doublelift? Where's fucking all of them? Where are they all on Twitter? Historic victory. We've gotten this. It shows up. They haven't said a fucking peep. None of them have said anything. They're not doing interviews. They're not doing talk shows. Essentially, to me, they have realized how badly misaligned their perception of the ecosystem was to what they thought was going on. Because I can tell you in Counter-Strike, it's the same thing. You know this from Flashpoint. Pro players in Counter-Strike also play for teams that, aside from the rare team like ENCE, loses money to pay them enormous salaries. And dude, they talk behind the scenes like they're getting fucked. Like, no, I should be on twice as much. You know, my team's making all this money from sponsors and that. I'm like, when you say make money, you do know they don't make profit, right? They're making the money, paying it to you, and losing money and taking more VC. I saw fans that kept saying stuff like, so wait a minute, so the VC was just free money coming in and now the free money tap's turned off. VC is them buying equity in your fucking company, you cretin. You've actually bargained away the future of your company and potential profits and ownership in order to get money today. It wasn't free money. If you think it is free money, you have a fucking free space between your ears. Like, you're not even qualified to have an opinion about this topic. Like, that's another thing that I find sick, where people are talking about how greedy these LCS owners are. You mean the LCS owners that have leveraged all the equity out of their company to provide you with Korean imports so you can have a chance to come top 8 at Worlds? My, how fucking greedy they are. You know, if there's a world where if they cynically just spent as little as possible and when before LCS min-maxed on the contract as much as they could and just put out like the 4th best team but using the best GM, they could actually have made money at this point in time. In some ways, they paid for us all to have this show, and then we all turn around and spit in their face and go, just make more money, bro. Just stop spending money, bro. Just fucking unionize and have a salary cut, bro. Like, no one knows what the fuck they're talking about. The reason I know I don't is because when I look into these areas, like everything, as the fucking bonfire of knowledge grows, the darkness of ignorance is further revealed. The more you get to know about any of these fields, the more you should know. You know less and less and less. There's so much to know that you need experts in each of these areas, and we aren't the experts. I only know the little things I've been able to find and the things I was able to cross-reference. I wouldn't pretend to know how you could fix the whole ecosystem. Even, by the way, what a naive, like, fucking wearing a beret first year of uni idea that is. Like, oh, maybe just fix the whole ecosystem, bro. Like, what are you talking about? It's an ecosystem, a giant diverse thing with a million different factors going in and all concepts going. You can't even conceive of the ecosystem, never mind fix it. You're not going to come down like God and just, oh, the lightning bolt, I fixed it all now, mate. It's such a complicated area. So if you ever have a super easy answer, spoiler, you're the super simple one, not the fucking answer.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
I mean, it's also an ecosystem where nobody knows all of the inputs except for the publishers. Like, we're all, the thing is that 99% of the people who exist in this esports world are not aware of the true revenues that it generates. It is a very few people within the publishers who have the complete set of information.
Oh, and by the way, Monty, I'll tell you who didn't want all that information to come out that I revealed in my video, you dumb motherfuckers. You know, all the players are like, lol, the teams are loving that you revealed that. The teams don't want any investor to ever watch my video, you dumb fucks. Who's going to invest after you find out that you're just a losing venture and that there's no way out and no mechanisms right now to get the money back and that you're just going to essentially be bleeding money? And right now, there is no path to the future where we all make the billions like the sports leagues. There's none. We're just heading over a fucking cliff and we're just praying that before we reach the end of the cliff, someone quickly builds a bridge like that, step by step, like a cartoon, and we make it over the other side. And when we get to the other side, magically, question mark, we're the NFL. Congrats, everyone's making billions and your franchise is worth $20 billion. Like, this is such a naive thing. So actually, what people don't know is the only reason this misperception was allowed to exist about who was making the money and who was greedy is because it actually didn't benefit teams to basically brag. You know, we're just spending loads of money and we're not making much back. That's a terrible fucking business pitch. People don't want to hear that. That's why when you go, I can tell you, I've been in these meetings. When you go into these meetings, here's the secret, guys. They're trying until they are forced to, as part of the actual, like, making the contracts and checking your due diligence financially. They're not showing you the numbers now. They're showing you graphs with projections and lines that go like this. And like, well, you know, if it trebled and quadrupled and infinity exponentially grew. And also, you know that the NBA grew like that. They're using examples and allegories and fucking projections because it's all about getting someone to invest into the future. If they knew what the reality is now, people would be less less likely to invest, or at least the big people you want. There'll always be some idiot with some money or some scam artist.
So I will say about the team ownership and like investing money in esports right now is that there's two kind of schools of thought from my conversation with ownership groups that are happening right now. And Harris, you can back me up and fill this in, which is that there are the people who are basically clamping down. So some of the teams are getting pressure from their boards, which contain their venture capital investors, to basically, run revenue neutral and as much as possible stop losing money so that at least they can kind of weather the esports winter. And that's what you see. So some people interpret this as like, oh, this team doesn't have any money now. In fact, a lot of the teams have rather substantial war chests. They're just cutting spending so that they have, basically they can operate for 5, 10, 15 years based on their current money, their cash reserves. So that's one thing that's happening. The other thing that's happening is there are new and potential new team owners who are interested. And you may say, well, why would a very wealthy person or venture capital fund or whatever try and get into esports in North America right now? And the answer is this: they're playing a long game. They think that the market's going to stabilize in the long term. And factually, since franchising began, it has never been cheaper to buy an LCS title than it is right now.
You look at the stock deal that just happened with NRG at CLG. Yeah.
So think about this, guys. Previously, you might have to spend $5-7 million to assemble a roster that you were hoping was going to win LCS. Now, with a bunch of teams cutting to be revenue neutral, you still have to lose money, but you don't have to lose as much money as you did previously. And so for that reason, if you are playing a long game and you believe that stacking titles is going to increase your fandom in your brand and make you more relevant potentially to future Riot games that come out. Remember, they've got a fighting game coming out. We've got CS2 coming out, to make you more attractive to get into future games. Because those people, Riot is going to choose, just like they did in Valorant, the teams that they think best serve them. And if you are a big brand and you have an established relationship with them, that gets you into the conversation, if not your foot in the door. So there are real reasons why you might want to lose money right now if you are a new investor, because objectively, you're just losing less money than you would have previously.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this. I just want to talk just a couple of things because we've touched on a little bit here. There's absolutely back to what Thorin said before, and then I'll get to what you just said, Monte. There's absolutely an ignorance here from these players and these player agents. They have absolutely no idea about any economics. You guys fight with all these fans like all the time. My fight is with player agents who think that their players are so poorly mistreated, and they go on Twitter and they post all the time, look at how this team treated this player, and oh my God, look at the working conditions. You have nothing. You make so much money for your players that they do not deserve. Shut the hell up. I don't want to hear it. Like, stop. I just don't care. So that's the first thing. And then I would also note that ignorance used to exist at Riot as well. This actually, and Thorin, you did a show about this back in 2016, where there was a dispute between Mark Merrill and Reggie back in the day about whether esports teams were making money. And Mark Merrill made the claim that esports teams were making money, right? And this was a big thing at the time. And I remember
the same claim was made by people, including Philip Aram alluded to this, on the Four Horsemen recently. He implied people were taking $3 million, never existed, and using it to fund other games. Holy shit. He actually believed that, by the way. He thought that people were funding a CSGO team off the money they do off League. So anyway, that still exists, dude. That's still a thing that people think. But Riot definitely thought
Harris,
TSM was doing that.
To your point, that claim was ridiculous at the time when that was the love me some Reggie, but like, why don't you spend more money that we make you on League of Legends on your League of Legends team, which obviously makes no sense. Cause like, if he could spend more money to make more money, then he would do that. That's just business. Right. But the hilarious thing is that's what TSM is actually doing now. They have league minimums. They're getting paid $1 million+ for this split of League of Legends, and they have all their players on league minimums at 375. So the prophecy of Mark Merrill has actually come true in TSM's case, which is the wild part. They are profitable now.
Yeah, and so what I would say is that was some ignorance that existed back then, and I think that to some degree that still exists amongst players, although the kind of veil of ignorance is kind of being pulled over themselves right now, and they're kind of saying, oh my God, this is such a shit show. But I would say that I don't know, I necessarily disagree that there isn't a path to the future. I think that generally speaking, you look at the history of baseball that existed from 1880 to like 1962, before like the first major television deals that existed, these leagues still existed, they just didn't exist at large scale. Like they didn't make a ton of money. That could be the future of esports. esports for a little while here right now. We could cut salaries. We could actually make this thing sustainable. It just so happens that people want to see the NFL. They want to see the MLB. They want the big glitz, the glam. That doesn't exist right now because the fan base isn't necessarily there to feel the viewership, and the viewership doesn't want to pay money. And that's where most of the money comes from. In the English Premier League, 67% of the revenue comes from broadcasting rights, right? Like, you have $12.8 billion in TV deals. That doesn't exist here. So, like, we're not at that point right now. We don't have the viewership. We don't have the fandom. We need to get there. That's not to say it can't happen in the future. I think it is going to happen in the future because people will necessarily gravitate towards things that they enjoy doing and watching, and people just happen to enjoy watching video games. So I think that this thing can exist down the line. The question is, are you willing to feel some pain in the interim and not be the NFL and not sell people on that and just basically exist as a small business, not at scale, and that's it. And so to that point, I would add two things here, right? I would say that it is the case that I think there are two paths. The first path is, Monte, you mentioned, there's billionaires. These billionaires just fund these fantasy sports teams because they want to go play with their other billionaire friends and go sit in their suites and be like, oh, look at my team of players. I constructed a better business than you. Ha, 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 ha. Right? Like, that's exactly what professional sports is most of the time, right?
I've been in those rooms. It's weird.
Right. But no billionaire really cares about professional esports, right? Like, I don't think that they actually have an affinity for it because they didn't play it as a kid. It's not something they were really invested in. Like John Ledecky of the New York Islanders, he's a big hockey fan. Like, these people are all, Walter O'Malley in the 1950s, he was a baseball fan, right? Like, these guys have this fandom. The billionaires don't necessarily care too much about League of Legends, right?
Well, some
do.
of them do.
Some do. And that's where I'm getting. I think what is likely to be the case in the future is, if this will continue to be a loss generator, you will have billionaires' kids that basically want to fund this because they enjoy having this product, and those are more likely to be like influencers, like a Mr. Beast or someone like that have a lot of money that they could just throw around in this kind of capacity, and it boosts their brand, it boosts their other businesses. And that's the second one, boosting your other business. You could invest in esports right now and have another product and use the esports product to funnel towards that other product as a marketing venture. And that is something you could do as well. And so those are the two ways I kind of see this in the immediate future. In the future, I do actually think this is going to be a viable business, but there will need to be some pain in the interim.
I think there's a massive aspect as well, which you'll notice. This is why I said on that conversation of the Four Horsemen, like, essentially, are we catering to one person's perspective and just basically asking him to read his PR response? Or are we actually having the abstract about what the industry is? Because another thing that's another enormous elephant in the room that you can't ignore is something like baseball. The joke is, what I'm about to say isn't even true, but the theory goes can last forever. Spoiler, the average baseball fan gets older and older and older and older because young people don't watch the sport. So actually, sports like baseball, maybe even basically the NFL and baseball, the two big ones in America as far as I know, if anything, they might have to actually, unless they can generate more revenue elsewhere, downsize some of the aspects. Like, they might have to put salaries down and all the rest of it as the business doesn't become as big. It can't always be growing. It's not the capitalist dream that it's always expanding outwards. Well, here's what no one bothers to think about. League of Legends is a mega old fucking game. To even switch to League of Legends 2, no one knows. Like, as far as I know, they're not developing a League of Legends 2. They're not building a new engine right now. They're just chilling still, sort of enjoying the sweet spot where it's still a big game. Who says in 10 years League of Legends, the game, specifically, because we're not talking about general esports here. There is no such thing as esports like that. It's individual games with teams and players in that game. So in the game of esports, who says in League of Legends, who says League of Legends in 10 years gets bigger? Maybe the viewership keeps going down. Maybe less people play the game. By the way, God forbid, and this is why teams actually aren't incentivized to go too hard on it right now, all the unionization stuff, is what happens if in 3 years a new genre is invented in esports with a new game? That's what happened with League of Legends, if people don't know. And it's the biggest game in the world, and it has none of these issues, and you start all the way at the beginning of the industry again in a totally open market without the game dev yet putting their league in, and people will go to that Wild West. That's where some of the people will go with their money, and they won't stick in league. So we're also acting like, even though I said like it actually isn't true, we're acting like this game's gonna last 100 years and we've got time and decades to put these things in place.
I would also note just one thing on that, Thorin. Like, I look at Melee because I watch Melee a lot. That's one of the big esports I'm into. Like, it existed since 2001, and it has existed without the support of a developer. It has been entirely grassroots, and that
been actively fucked by Nintendo at times, right?
Oh,
They've come along and said, we'll cancel the circuit or whatever. You can't do a tournament.
Right. There's definitely been some developer, interruption, and I would say that actually has been one of the more stable ecosystems. As screwed up as that sounds, because like people kind of recognize the limitations of the ecosystem. Sure, they could draw 70K for a major, and that's great. And to be honest with you, you're probably not spending that much on these players to go do that 70K. It's actually sustainable. You know, the best player in the world right now in Super Smash Bros. Melee, his name is Cody Schwab. He's from New York, right? Like, he is an incredible Fox player. He's a free agent. He doesn't even have a team right now. He's the best player in the world in one of the biggest games in the league, in the world, that's been around since 2001. One of the most sustainable esports that have existed. He can't even find a team. It's an actual sustainable ecosystem. That is what the ecosystem looks like right now when the top player is not worth your time for a league that's drawing 70K in viewership. That honestly is an encapsulation of what we're at. But honestly, I think that is what we need to move towards. We need to be more grassroots. When you get all this glitz and glam that's put in by a publisher and everything, like, I think that's a problem in some respects because it creates bad expectations and it's unrealistic. And I think that when you have things like World of Warcraft, and you'll notice the World of Warcraft posters behind me, right? Like World of Warcraft's the race to the world first. You'll get hundreds of thousands of concurrent viewers during that 2-week period every single year. You're not spending that much on these players, right? Because there isn't that market that's just been propped up by this fantasy in some respects, right? So what you have is a scene that has existed since 2004 that loads of people care about, which is actually somewhat sustainable, and it will continue to exist as long as the game is popular because people aren't spending themselves into oblivion. Sorry. Yeah. That's another rant.
I'll just use my role as the esports historian. What people won't know is this: before the age of VC, the industry had to run on a profit. You had companies, whether it was through sponsorship and frugal spending on salaries. And by the way, I can tell you right now, I worked for some teams. They did secret backroom, illicit soft salary caps where they all got together and said, let's agree. Look, we can fight over which player we want with a little bit of wiggle room, but don't go crazy. No one pay them 2K. No one pay them 3K. We'll pay them 1K or 1.5. And the point is, maybe you can fight me for the star player, but then let's agree that the other players only get X so they all evens out. People used to run successful businesses. The biggest teams in the world, the SK Gamings, the Fanatics, these were real companies. They actually were just businesses that ran with, they took in income, they made some profit, they spent some on the costs, and the ecosystem ran. And sponsors at the time largely also paid for the tournaments. They paid Intel paid ESL to run a circuit. Samsung paid World Cyber Games to run their circuit. Whoever the fuck sponsored ESWC in France paid for that to be run. And it was a real circuit, but here's the problem, and here's why it doesn't exist. Because one, if you know anything, and none of you do, and not you guys, obviously I'm talking to fans here, about finance, the person who buys sets the price in an open market. So when the VCs come in, like everyone's old pal fucking Noah Winston, and they pay more, then the price goes up because that's what the players ask for more now, and there's more bidders, and it just keeps going until it goes up and up and up, out of control. Eventually, by the way, this is the one area I don't feel sorry for the LCS teams. I think they were naive to think Riot would ever, we've already discussed, Riot makes loads of money anyway. They're not going to take time out of their schedule, opportunity cost, and go and make you millions of dollars. And who even knows how you make millions of dollars without pay-per-view? So they naively thought, if you give us franchise slots, the slot will only get worth more and more and more and more. Not the case currently, but was the case until a year or two ago. Another reason teams are willing to stick around. If you bought in for 10, but it's worth 40, and you're sitting on it thinking it's Bitcoin 3 years ago, maybe it's worth 100 next year. There's a reason to stay in and keep spending money and losing money. But also the other factor was, when you bought in, people don't know this, teams like TSM and Cloud9 hadn't taken VC as far as I know. If they'd taken it, they'd taken very small amounts. It was only people like Team Liquid had spent massively and leveraged their companies already. But once you make franchise leagues, that's why if you notice the new model, that was a topic on the Four Horsemen, the new model isn't to make someone pay a franchise fee. It's the other way around. We pay you to be involved because you bring your players and we want you to run a successful team. When you have to pay tens of millions of dollars to buy into a league, that was more than any of these businesses were able to operate on. That was probably more. That was probably triple their yearly revenue. Never mind fucking profit they were making. So the second you made franchise fees of 10 million, 30 million if it's Overwatch League, you enforced all top teams must take VC and get into this rat race that just goes race to the bottom of all having no money, or you end up in a world where you're just cut out the game. You're H2K and no one remembers you ever existed. Pick any team you want that doesn't exist that used to be in LCS back in the day. Any of those teams, you never hear from them now. They're gone. So in the modern world, you have to take the VC. That just became the necessity, and there's no way around it. There is no, like people say, sitting back. Because this happens, I'll give you the example if you want some more esports history. Right now, In Finland, there is a small team called ENCE, used to be partially owned by Lurpis and run by Natu, legendary Counter-Strike players from Finland. They are not in franchise leagues. They don't pay franchise fees, and they are in a semi-open circuit like Counter-Strike. And the only reason they're making a little profit after taxes and costs is because they're essentially using, it's almost like a startup mentality. The reason a startup can run from very little at the beginning is because hopefully one of the founders is a genius programmer and he just works for free for year one instead of taking a $300,000 salary. Basically, they're only able to do it. They're the rare exception that proves the rule. You can't do this in tier one esports because they actually have just nailed the game of like scouting. They've gotten the most frugal players for now, and then they sell them for an amount, and then they get the next player. Every team can't do this, guys, and it's unreasonable to expect them because essentially they're just the best skill set that doesn't cost money. Everyone else is running off things that cost money, I'm afraid.
It's also a zero-sum game. If every team did it, then no one would do it. So it is reserved by definition to the top teams.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And spoiler, ENCE is not the number one Counter-Strike team in the world, and they don't win the major. Yeah. So there's that as well.
I don't watch too much Counter-Strike. I do.
Well, but even then, there's the clapback that's happening now. Richard Lewis reported that Valve is now clapping back against the franchise. They're not technically franchised, but they might as well be for how difficult it is to qualify for like EPL and Blast. And so now the thing that's happening allegedly that Richard has done the reporting on has been that Valve is getting pissed because Valve likes having an open infrastructure, and they're like, this is too closed for Valve. So in CS2, hey guys, you want our license? Well, you're gonna have to cut back on this like exclusivity bullshit.
What you're saying, Monty, is another game dev is so out of touch. They think that the ecosystem makes sense and are now going to restrict people from revenue-making opportunities. So I'll tell you what's going to happen. I told you this on the Four Horsemen with League of Legends. If you're a dickhead to the team owners, the ones who spend all the money right now, they will leave your game and go to a game where they aren't dickheads. They'll go to Rainbow Six where they get a better cut of the digital product. They'll go to Rocket League where you only have to have one or two players and you get way more viewership relative to the player in min-max. They'll go to Smash Brothers or whatever the fuck. They will go to other games. They will not just go, because this is where the game dev is mental. The game devs actually are like on some Ready Player One shit. They think their universe is where we all want to live forever, and they don't know you can come out of the video game and there's a whole world with choices. So they act like, you want to be in my game? CS is like, only if you make it worth my while, mate. If you make it so it's a nightmare to be in your game and I just lose money, and now I get, because you're taking away partner spots, I get nothing for it. Well, then I'm just leaving. I'm bouncing. Spoiler, we ran a league called Flashpoint. I'll give someone a little bit of esports history here, because this just shows how players and fans are stupid as fuck. So in 2016, at the end of 2016, there was going to be a league which was essentially proto Flashpoint. It was called the PEA, Professional Esports Association. The team owners came up with it because it's a dog shit name that doesn't even make sense. It was basically North American LCS, but a franchised league. That's not, by the way, what Flashpoint was. In theory, it was open to everyone. This was going to be all the North American orgs at the time, the big ones, got together and essentially said, in our region, we're going to have a league that you're playing. Now, at the time, they made a dispute of you won't play in Pro League because they were trying to power grab. But the idea is we'll have our own league. And they were even offering a deal that I'm telling you right now, if you're a pro player, you will never see this deal again in your life ever. They were going to split like 50-50 with a pool of talent, people working the broadcast, and the pro players, half the profits. Any revenue, we're going to split half the revenue just straight out the gate. No, you don't have to unionize. We'll just give you it straight out the gate. They thought, well, these guys must get that the ecosystem, we're losing loads of money on their salaries. We need to make a league like this so that we can do things like broadcast rights from the leagues, and maybe we can have ticket sales. And essentially, it's our region, it's North America. We know this space. We can craft out. Now, look, they wouldn't in that year have been the best league, which Flashpoint wanted to be, but they would have had the NA market cornered. And I can tell you, when players and fans pushed back against this, and it was just cancelled outright, and then years later they tried to do it as Flashpoint. I'll tell you right now, here's what happens when you make it so that people can't make enough money, and definitely if the revenue numbers nowhere match up. What happened to Flashpoint? All those big orgs, Gen G, by the way, the #1 Korean team last split. You had Cloud9, one of the biggest orgs in the history of esports. You had fucking Envious, who in COD and all these other games are massive. They've got an Overwatch League spot. You had all the biggest orgs in the world refused to spend money because they didn't see the long-term benefit and eventually exited the game and the league closed down. So I don't think people understand, like, this isn't as simple. That's even the game dev Monty doing their own version. That's Valve going, just make more money elsewhere, bruh. Just get rid of the partner spots, bruh. And then, like, basically everyone's Reggie in this scenario, and I'm fucking sick of Reginald's. I'm sick of Reginald's.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. And I think that we actually have seen some teams that have left the space. I mean, you mentioned H2K. I was affiliated with that team for a while as well. And I can tell you that the ownership group of that team was kind of, they forecasted a lot of things right. Like they basically, you look back at the letters that they wrote back in 2017 and 2016.
It aged mega well.
Yeah, it has aged very well because they were absolutely correct that this is not a sustainable ecosystem, that this is a marketing enterprise, and that there needs to be substantive change. And I mean, having been affiliated with that for a long time, I can tell you that is kind of where I've drawn a lot of my views as well, because I view that as being, it was correct then and it's right now, and it's not going to change. And really, I think we've seen attempts to kind of do what you guys did with Flashpoint. Obviously, I work with some of the teams that were associated with that and help put that stuff together. But I mean, like H1PL, I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was another example of a league that kind of did something similar. But yeah, when you have these kinds of leagues that are formalized basically between the teams and with the players, like I think what you're looking at is the ecosystem, that is the sustainability thing in the future. And I'll say one last thing on this. I think that there's going to come a time when Riot Games is going to be presented with a choice, and the choice is going to be: do you want to be considered a joint employer of these teams, or do you not want to be considered a joint employer of these teams? And there's all kinds of liabilities that go alongside joint employment, including being jointly and severally liable for certain things like taxes in the event that you need to do withholdings, social security taxes. In America, they'd be responsible to, theoretically, if the teams can't make the payments for that, they might be responsible for that, right? There's all kinds of liability issues that they might be responsible for as a joint employer. But there's a credible argument that can be made that they are acting as a joint employer because of the amount of control that they exercise. So I think in the future we will be, if we actually get to a point with unionization where they are named as a joint employer in this collective bargaining agreement or in this collective bargaining negotiation, they're going to go have to fight to the NLRB. Then they're going to have to appeal that to see whether they are a joint employer. Spoiler, they probably are a joint employer, at which point they do have that liability, and they either relinquish the control to the teams to run the league that they want to do, the way they want to run it, or they keep that control and concede the fact that they're a joint employer. And that is one breakpoint I see for this in the future. Although I think we're further away from that now because the LCSPH has no incentive to go bring that kind of a thing because they've already gone ahead and showed they're powerless, they're feckless. So yeah.
Well, I also think that Riot has I can reveal this. They have over the years explored. I don't know how seriously, because I'm not internal at Riot, how serious they were, but they have put feelers out there about people being willing to run the LCS who aren't Riot.
Sure.
In terms of production, somebody paying them a licensing fee to kind of take over the production and operation of the league. Now it's never come to pass, and maybe that's because they were just taking a look, and maybe nobody ever made the right deal that they thought would make sense. But it hasn't been out of the question, ironclad, that Riot would run the LCS until the end of time. Like, they have had suitors for that, and they have courted the possibility of somebody else taking on the operational costs of this away from them.
Yeah, and I would say that it's not just like the production fee, it's the literal control that they exercise over the league, like the control that they exercise over the employees. You must come in on this day, you must attend these media interviews, you must wear this when you do these things, like this kind of makeup, these are your hours. Like, that's things that typically an employer exerts control over an employee on. So they are a joint employer. That is just what they are, right? And so there will come a time when they are forced to either acknowledge that, or they are not going to acknowledge that. And if they're not going to acknowledge it, it will be forced upon them, because the court will make a determination that, hey, you're a joint employer, and then they'll either have to say, we're relinquishing this control, we're going to have a typical employer-employee relationship between the teams and the players, or they're going to continue to maintain this status. And if they maintain that status, then they'll be drawn into collective bargaining negotiations.
This is basically similar, if people want to know, to what happened with the whole Tfue thing, but obviously that case didn't end in a way you'd really got like a precedent set in this sense, because basically one of the problems with how esports ran, even up to a few years ago, is all players were listed as contractors and didn't get things like healthcare. But then basically, as far as I know, as a layman in this particular topic, when I asked experts, they told me, like, essentially what happens every time in esports is how you find out that essentially people feel and they go downwards into esports from other industries because they're doing badly. No one comes in because they're doing awesome. Like, if someone comes from the NFL to League of Legends, be very worried, because there's a reason they're not in the NFL anymore. It's not because League of Legends is awesome. What you tend to find is whenever you go to lawyers and experts, they go, holy shit, none of this is legal. What the fuck? People are doing it like that. And so I remember talking to someone and saying, well, these players are contractors and they have the contract like this. And then they were like, well, then how, for example, could you sign a deal that says you play for 3 years, but then you just tell someone 3 months later in like one of those circuits like Counter-Strike, right, you go into this tournament on this day and be there this time. It's like, wait a minute, they're not an employee though. Like, you didn't agree with that at the beginning of the contract. Like, this is... The point is there's so much grey area here that people don't know. And by the way, at the moment, all the people issuing these contracts rely on that. They rely on the ignorance of all the other parties to not even know what's actionable or what's legitimate. Or in the case of what I revealed about LEC, there were players didn't even know some of the things went against German law. Like, you can't even ask people to do certain things or make certain demands of them or fire them without cause, etc. So this is why, again, to bring it all back, ignorance is the real enemy here. And education, which Philip Iram did point out, but he meant more just telling the players what he wanted. Education of all the parties involved. If you're actually just, here's the key thing. If we're just like we are, a fan of the ecosystem who wants a really cool ecosystem, everyone being educated only benefits us. There's certain parties it benefits less. They want people kept in the dark. But for me, I just want everyone to know what's going on.
Yeah, and I would just say particularly with the employee issue that you raised, I mean, that was a big thing when I got involved in the ecosystem back in 2015, 2016 with H2K. Like, that was something we pushed for because we realized that, particularly with German employment law, it's so much stricter. There's all kinds of things you can do with termination rights that notice periods that you're required to give that the teams weren't adhering to. So, I think that the industry has kind of changed a little bit since then, but your point is absolutely well taken, that there is just a lot of gray area. You raised Tfue. One thing that I've spent an inordinate amount of time, I would consider myself, this is probably the thing I've spent the most amount of time on, is actually the Talent Agencies Act. And that is something that no one talks about in the context of, and I could do a 5-hour podcast on the Talent Agencies Act, and it's just something that no one actually even thinks about in the context of esports. But if you go ahead and read the Tfue complaint, that is the premise of that complaint is based on the fact that, there was a violation of the Talent Agencies Act, the contract should be rescinded, and he could get out of the contract. So, like, there's all kinds of things that people just are figuring out right now. And I would just say that, like, at some point there's going to be a reckoning, and I think that maybe we're kind of heading there already, but it does require the public being a little bit more educated to kind of be patient with what's happening right now and understand things, as opposed to just saying like, oh, like, let's just have a salary cap, or oh, like, why can't you do this, that? And people are thinking through these issues. Like, that's basically what I try to think about every single day. Like, I try to think these things through and try to make it better if I can. So yeah.
By the way, there's also a side topic that's related to why salaries are so high. And one of the chief offenders, in my opinion, although they do great work on Twitter with the pleb fans, so everyone will think the opposite, is the fucking agents that have come along. Because these agents, I mean, no, to be fair, you're a lawyer, so it's no better for you. They're bloodsuckers. They're just people there to profit from their fucking clients and tell their clients sometimes to advise them to do things which actually financially help them more than the particular player. So understandably, you have a bias here because you represent the teams who in some senses are opposite side of the table from the player agent. But I remember a few years ago when this is the swap that happened. And this is why some of the most charming silver-tongued player agents are the scumbags in esports. Because these are the guys where they don't tell you this. The old way you did it was you just paid a percentage, I think it was, of your salary to the agent. You paid like a set percent and that just went on. Then they changed and they had these new deals for certain pro players I won't name, I'll do them that favor, where they just got a percentage at the beginning, Harris, of your entire contract. They just got a cut of like this amount. And essentially it was sort of like, you can just as a fan think of it this way, it was like they get a giant signing bonus every time you change teams because of like heavy negotiations. So what happened was, I can tell you, once I heard of this, I immediately looked, and it's like putting the glasses from They Live on. I could see which agents it was before I even looked into it, because it was the agents where magically their players, every single time their contract ends, every time someone might be interested in buying out, they're always pushing for the guy to go to the other team so they can push the big contract up, get their cut off the top, and then they don't want you to stay there for 5 years. They don't want you to negotiate. They don't want you to do a fucking LeBron and Dwayne Wade, like take less so the team can be better. No, they are directly incentivized to make you get as big a contracts as possible, switch teams as often as possible. And so there's another area where a fan won't know, because sadly I told you, every fan is automatically on the side of the players, partly because they're viewing this through a lens of the fact the player is the exploited worker in the Victorian factory and the team owner is the evil guy making millions who lives in a big house like, more chicken and gravy, please. Send gruel to the servants. Because they're viewing it through that lens. They think, well, anything you can get for the players, good. They don't know that some of these agents came along. And quite frankly, yeah, some of them pumped up the player salaries. But that was good to a point, and it can become negative eventually. Believe it or not, you can pay people too much. It can actually bleed the system out. Yeah. So that's another one of those considerations that's really complicated.
It's absolutely, and I have to be careful what I say, because I have to have a relationship with a lot of these agents. Some of them are my friends as well, because they're constantly on the other side of the table and we do work together. But I think that there has been a lot of misrepresentation as to the status of that ecosystem, and a lot of ignorance that is intentionally kept ignorant by a lot of those agents, because they do not want to reveal the actual status of the entire industry. And they don't want to reveal that their players are making so much money. It's beneficial from them from a marketing perspective to go on Twitter and say, look at how poorly this player was treated. Like, this is unbelievable. If this player was, made that, do that, whatever, like, doesn't make a difference, because at the end of the day, that's going to get them more clients. They're going to see this big name on Twitter that's fighting for this player, then other players are going to go to them. That's just capitalism, right? So it is absolutely advantageous for them to exceed the truth, and that's propagated by players who happen to have the most popularity. I saw someone say on your Twitter comments, which I waded into about 5 seconds ago, reluctantly, but I saw someone say that, like, HGK didn't have any fans, or UOL didn't have any fans. I think it's actually true that there, to some degree, like, there was a period of time when I was involved there that Forgiven left the roster because he had his after the spring split, we brought Freeze on in 2016, right? Like, when that happened, we lost a lot of Greek fans. Almost all the Forgiven fans really no longer cared about HGK. And so, like, I think that it is absolutely true that because the players control the fandom, they have the eye of the public, and because of the fact that these agents basically can go ahead and spout this, which then gets amplified by their client players, this misconception of the industry has just been lingering for so long. And there just needs to there will have to come a point when people see the truth, and then hopefully at that point we could kind of rebuild. That's been my goal, at least. This, to be clear, this actually, in some respect, it's not beneficial to my clients for me to come ahead and do this interview and talk about this kind of thing, because I'm sure that it's not great to talk about how poor the industry is feeling right now, the esports winter, for their businesses. So that's just kind of, this is my perspective.
I mean, I think it's pretty evident, and we would be talking on the show about that regardless. So
yeah,
it doesn't really matter that much. I'm curious if you were.
I don't only work in League of Legends. Like, spoiler one, I prefer fucking LTK and LPL anyway. I don't give a flying fuck if all the Western teams die off, except for my friends that are in the teams or pro players. And secondly, I cover other games as well. I can bounce anytime I want. So y'all figure it out. Y'all figure it out. Not me.
Unfortunately, I don't have a bar license in China or Korea, so I'm a bit stuck. Yeah,
it's right. You're a lawyer. You can always not work in esports and be actually probably better off, if we're going to be real. If we're going to be real, probably could make some more money, not doing the old esports thing. But in any case, I want to get your take, Harris. If you were the god emperor of this situation, and you could control how to make both Riot, like the maximum benefit for Riot, the teams, and the players all at the same time, what would you do right now?
What would I do to kind of just make everyone
to stabilize the scene?
Yeah,
right? in a sustainable way.
I would basically say that there's a certain amount of revenue that's going to be generated by each party, and that I would have a league revenue sharing program, and I would say there's strong caps on exactly how much that money gets funneled, and that would be, like I said, I mean, we go back to the cap. That's exactly what I would do, because it has been the stabilizing mechanism across all of professional sports. Every single one of them has moved on from a place where they didn't have that. And I would also say, to be honest with you, there's certain things that should be just done for the benefit of the league. Like, consider that, like, the draft, the NHL draft, that is a huge event. They will sell out a stadium for that. They will have TV deals for that. People between TNT and ESPN, they will fight to cover the draft this year.
It's not even just that, Harris, and this is the argument that I've made about revealing player salaries, is that it drives media conversations.
Yeah.
And it especially drives media conversations and potential sponsorship and revenue opportunities during the off season when nothing is going on. Do you think that we at LFN would cover an LCS draft that happens in December? We would.
Absolutely.
We would.
It's a thing to talk about.
Do you think that, if we had access, and this is why I have long advocated that all esports player contracts should be public, is that because it creates interesting conversations about values of players that you can have on media to drive interest and discussion around the league. And by the way, the only argument I have ever heard against making these contracts public is that people will be mean to pro players on Twitter. Spoiler, guys, if somebody's going to be a dick on Twitter, they're just going to find a different way to be a dick to that player.
Yeah, I mean,
you're going to be a dick regardless.
I mean, in theory, I think it could have some sort of negative effect on the teams, because then there's a more established market for what these players would be worth. But the market's so out of whack right now anyway, I'm not sure that's even a good argument. And what I would also add to one thing is, one of my favorite things to do as a diehard hockey fan, you know what website I am on in the offseason before July 1st every single year, which is the date of free agency? I'm on capfriendly.com. Capfriendly.com is a website where I could basically construct a hockey team and like play around with the numbers to make it fit underneath the salary cap and see like what's feasible. And then I submit, I said, this is the roster I think the Islanders should have next year. And I press okay, and it submits to a forum where about 25,000 people tell me how stupid my idea is. Okay, like my idea might be stupid. I'm not an NHL general manager, but at the same time, it's a discussion point. It's a topic of conversation to keep people interested in the offseason. You can't constantly be playing games and it's not interesting. Roster construction is a really interesting thing that you do. It just, no one has really leaned into it. And for what it's worth, we can't have those kinds of conversations given the system that we have set up. We can't have a draft in this league because it's against antitrust law. It's a conspiracy to restrain trade. We can't do that unless we actually have a collectively bargained agreement which permits it. So we can't even get to these points right now. All these things that kind of are the highlight of traditional sports. Things like, oh, where's LeBron going to sign? Like, or when's Connor McDavid going to be off his entry level contract? Who's going to draft Connor Bedard this year for he's going to go to the Chicago Blackhawks, but like, who's going to draft him? He's going to spend the next 7 years there. He's going to build that Blackhawks brand back up. Like, we can't even have that conversation. It's not something that's permitted legally. We literally can't do it. And in the old days, the way that we kind of got around this in terms of roster construction was something called the reserve clause in the baseball leagues, right? What you would have is at the end of every single player contract, there'd be a 1-year perpetual right to stay with that team. You could not go find another team after you were with that team. That was real harm. Basically, the MLB owners had basically baked into those contracts a right which says you must stay with this team in perpetuity, right? Like, that at least allowed them to build their teams. They were able to generate successful fan bases around certain players. Everyone knows Mickey Mantle played for the New York Yankees forever. Joe DiMaggio, these are lifelong Yankees. They built up that brand because you have this clause there. It was beneficial in that regards. Actually, when Curt Flood, who fought the reserve clause, went to go fight it and said this is a violation of antitrust law, a lot of the baseball players said that would actually be bad if we got rid of this because it allows these teams to build up their brands. We can't even have these conversations right now in esports. We're so far away from this because of the amount of luxury that has been provided to these players. And the most fucked up thing is people don't even fucking realize it.
It's one thing I always try to do on these shows, Monty can attest to this, is I always try to make my expectations for the team relative to how much budget I know they're working with and how much expensive the players are. So I'll give you an example. The team that in theory GM'd this last split of LCS the best, without question, is not Cloud9. It's fucking Golden Guardians. They weren't working with the budget of Cloud9, probably not even FlyQuest, like a whole bunch of Team Liquid. They're way out of their league. That's essentially a team. That's the equivalent to like some team that should be like a small market team in the NBA, like getting to the final of the NBA. That'd be unbelievable. Like, you must have to work miracles to do that, but people don't know it. And it's even worse in Counter-Strike, as I say, with the semi-open circuit. You can have teams where I found this out during the Flashpoint era, where I went and found out all the salaries. There were teams that got to #1 in the world in the online era, paying $7,000 a month salary, while teams were paying $25,000 a month salary. But because no fan knows the salaries, they just think you're all playing with the same fucking money. And like, one guy chooses to have Simple and Nico, and the other guy chooses to have some bomb that's not good. And then when the guy who can't have Simple and Nico beats Simple and Nico, they're just like, well, whatever, guess they're all right for this season. It's like, no, they're geniuses. What are you talking about?
Massive story.
That's why, as you're saying, you actually would also have real discussion around GMs. And then how would that change the discussion around coaches? If you know this coach couldn't have top players and he worked magic with an academy player and an import from Brazil and an old retired player who, Emir type player who like it costs less now. That's when you'd really actually get the proper credit. And as you're saying, the discussions are more than just who's going to win. It's like the discussion now between who's like 9th and who's 6th becomes interesting because you know what they're spending.
Yeah, and so, you look at like a movie like Moneyball, and I know that people don't like to equate Moneyball to esports, but there was a general manager for the Oakland Athletics, his name was Billy Beane, and what he did was, in 2001, he actually lost Jason Giambi, who was an MVP candidate. Like, he lost him to the New York Yankees because the New York Yankees outspent them. The Oakland Athletics that year, they basically said, well, how do we do this? We can't compete with spending for these guys. We're going to innovate. We're going to innovate and find new ways to be competitive and find new statistics to track that other teams aren't doing it. Their problem forced innovation. And I will tell you, Billy Beane became one of the most revered general managers because he was able to lead these teams to successive 100-win seasons, despite the fact that he had no payroll to do it. It was amazing what he did. And people look at this and say that was incredible for the sport of baseball because it opened up a new way to look at the game and a new way to evaluate talent. It ushered in a new meta for this game. And we can't even have these kinds of conversations because of all the restrictions we have in place. We're not talking about that. We have the same boring, I don't want to be, too offensive. Like, we have the same boring conversations about every single year. Who's going to spend, who's going to get this player that's already been recycled through 5 freaking teams already? And, he's coming back in the league this time. Like, who's going to get him this time? That team will be great at Worlds. Like, no, stop it. I don't want to hear it. Go find some talent. Like, talk to me about the general managers that are able to hone in on important statistics, things that are not being measured right now, and then exploit that. And that's innovation. That's how you move the meta forward in terms of development. That's how I've always looked at it, at least. Innovate or die is kind of how I look at it.
I will say, by the way, this is a topic in CSGO that Kassad, I did a video on my channel with him, often talks about. That's actually where I would start spending my money if I'm one of these orgs. I would spend it on a general manager who I'm going to actually put, not like a job right now. At the moment, general manager now either doesn't exist or it's actually a real general manager, just your whole esports org. He doesn't have to specialize to one game. And it's like coach. You can just get fired next year and someone else comes in. No, that guy, like sports, has to be there for 10 years. He has to be there and establish this is the types of players I buy. This is the system I get. I'm going to get my type of a coach. When I get star players, I don't just get the one with the best stats. I get a guy he believes in the vision of the team. He's committed long term. I then promise him I can build this much around you. Not only will that, by the way, build fan bases because you'll have a coherence and an identity to your org. Like you can look at classic examples of the team that just made the NBA finals. The Heat, thanks to Pat Riley, have had an identity for many years. Even when they've cycled through players, they've gone back to like the defense approach and they've had Eric Spoelstra the whole time. And they've been able to have a through line that means they can come back up potentially later. And a Heat fan in the meantime didn't go, I'm just going to be a Warriors fan for the next few years. That is what happens in LCS. And so to me, I actually think that's the area. Because bear in mind, the salary of the GM isn't double lift salary. Instead of buying another double lift, get a really good GM, someone who knows, get like a Peter Dunn or Mac or something like this from LEC who know the space and they're shrewd at getting players and scouting the next talents. They go and they don't buy the top players because they don't work with a big budget. They go and find not the best ERL talent because he's going to G2 or Fnatic. They find the 8th best ERL talent who no one else has quite identified as that good, and they get there immediately and they get him on their team. Those people literally save you money. The money you spend on them will be like 200K and they will save you millions of dollars. There's an area you could innovate like you're talking about immediately.
Yeah, the problem is that Riot has actually imposed things that restrict the team's ability to do that, because you're absolutely right. What I should be doing right now is investing in young talent that is invested in my dream or of this roster of how I'm going to construct it and build from there. But because you have things like max contract years, which are there because players lobbied Riot to do it, so their contract can expire after they've proven themselves and make big money on another contract, right? Because remember, if the contract expires, they're free agents. They get to make the money again, right? Like, great. They're not on the same contract they were just at when they were a no-name player.
The worst example ever actually it was a bit like the Conor McDavid one. At the time he signed the deal, Bjergsen was on a straight fire contract. Little did he know that he signed at exactly the point the salaries went mental. And so the joke was half of why TSM was able to spend the third most amount of money but have a chance to win the league is because the best player in the whole league wasn't playing for even close to the highest salary. So people like Bjergsen, it was fucking them over actually. They were signed in for too long. But as you say, this is why, again, I'll bring it back to this point. You cannot please all parties. You can't do it. Someone is going to have to give something up for the other person to get it. So in this case, that's why it's so rich that players do this, make all these demands, their agents make all these demands. Like I said, they phone it in an academy and then they turn around like, well, if you can't just give me everything I want without any concessions from me, I guess you fucked up the space. It's like, did I? Was it just me? Was I the one doing all that shit that you just demanded now? So this is why everyone has to take a culpability in how the ecosystem got like this. Everyone, it's not an equal share of the blame, but everyone has to take some blame.
Yeah, I agree. And I wish that, the problem is like people like me, like no one wants to listen to what I'm saying because I'm, if I'm on Twitter screaming about this stuff from the rooftops, no one wants to listen to me. I'm not a player. I don't have 200,000 followers that are just going to retweet whatever I say or go on stream and say, parrot whatever line that they say on the stream, right? Like, because they're God to these people. Like the players love, they have fans. No one cares about me. So like there needs to at some point be some real education on what the economics look like. Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry I've ranted. This is a rant. It's therapeutic for me, like.
All right. I think we've kind of capped this off. And I do hope as a result of this, and I hope you guys appreciate too, like I said, the kind of trilogy we've done on this series across now 2 episodes of SI and the 4 Horsemen, because we've kind of shown every side of this equation to you guys. We had literally the head of the LCSPA. We had Rich, who is a player agent currently, and now we have Harris here who represents the teams. So these are the 3 parties in this, and so I think hopefully you've kind of gotten a 360 view of people's viewpoints on this issue and can make up your own mind. And thanks to us for being the only people who are doing this in the scene, basically, which is why LFN is valuable to you guys. So yes, Thorin, you're muted.
I'll just say this as well as a final note on that topic. The people who are like, well, why are you always just shouting about it? What, you mean you consistently being wrong, saying wrong things, telling me I'm wrong till I show you the facts and go, well, why didn't you tell me all along? I was doing it for 10 years. And so what happens is people who actually care get incensed by how stupid the system is and by how all the people who contribute to the problem go, it's not my fault, just fucking do an obvious thing that I can't even explain. People who care have passion. The person you want to watch out for, the snakes in esports, are the ones who talk like it's a C-SPAN episode on Sunday, like we'd have to change the economic factors within the current system and increase it. That's the guy who's the fucking devil right there, mate. He's the one who's profiting off this system. He's the one who's like, whoa, why are we getting passionate about this thing that we've all invested our lives and dreams into? Why don't we just have a little sit down at this business table and let's talk about this in a very rational way? And then, spoiler, I'll just add this in. You're the idiots who watch Skip Bayless and then hate Skip Bayless. But if there actually was someone who said Skip Bayless's opinions with no exaggeration and no flair and just sat there going, I actually think LeBron's a bit overrated because he often can't make free throws and down the stretch he will look for a pass, you wouldn't watch it because it's not entertaining, you fucking idiots. You actually hate watch this shit. I know because I have literally made millions of dollars off you hate watching this shit, kind of like how you hate watch the LCS. So actually suck my dick. I am entertaining while I tell you, while you are a fucking peon. You didn't pay anything for it. Ask for a refund. Jog on.
Hashtag I am esports.
I am. Proved it again. No, wait, I'm not even an investigative journalist, but I just waked up one day. What's that? Oh, people like Jacob Wolf are still huffing their own farts. Oh, I might just do his job better than him. Oh, what's that? I got all the numbers in. Well, I think that's enough for me. I'll clock off at 4 p.m. today. Might have a hot dog. Fucking hell, it's too easy, boys. Make it harder. I'm like that fucking meme, like, Jesus, give me more harder battles. He's like, fucking hell, you're already the best, Thorin. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. All
right, Harris, any final words? I know you kind of already begged the fans to educate themselves on this. Well, hopefully you and we have done a good job of that this episode. I think it was very clear about some of the issues that are facing the teams and the sustainability of this industry. So parting thoughts?
I just want to say thank you guys for having me on. This was a joy. I was a little bit nervous about coming on at first because I thought that I was going to get yelled at by the fans, but I guess it's not the case. And thank you so much for, I think it was a fair interview and fair questions, and hopefully I answered them well.
All right. Well, guys, thanks to Harris. We've had enough legal legends. Now we can actually talk about some League of Legends. We're going to take a quick break, guys, and we'll dive into some of the news and then do some viewer questions.
Hey, Monty. I miss our old chats on OGN about Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Jurassic Park, Street Sharks during those League of Legends games.
Yeah, that was really fun. I'm sure the fans miss them too. They crave being told how there hasn't been any good Star Wars since Return of the Jedi.
Hey, what about Andor?
Except Andor.
And Rogue One.
Absolutely not, Stoa. That is the biggest delusion in Star Wars fandom.
No. Okay. We never did hash that out. Let's be honest. The esports kept getting in the way.
Yeah, the damn esports. You know, we could just have those conversations.
I mean, I guess the fans call it the Monty Doa podcast anyway when we were doing it.
Yeah, we'll talk about whatever new stuff is coming out and revisit some of the topics from the OGN broadcast that we never quite got resolved.
Yeah, you have never given Rogue One the respect it deserves.
Don't even start with
Oh,
that.
and Avatar 2, The Way of Water, is now on Disney+. Plus.
Oh my God, mother...
Right, we're back to do some viewer questions. If you're wondering how you ask questions, it's not in Twitch chat. Don't read Twitch chat, except occasionally when actually, I'll let you in behind the curtain. I mainly do that when I'm annoyed at something. I want to see if some moron is saying something like that. And then I just choose that guy. Like, I'm like one of those medieval kings, like, cut his head off, take him to the stocks now. I have ultimate power. But if you want to actually ask a question, you don't do it via Twitch chat. You do it via our Discord, the Last Free Nation Discord. If you subscribe there is a channel where you can submit questions and then Monty picks them out.
Yeah. Also, for you guys, you just saw a promotion, as we discussed on the 200th episode. If you guys watched that episode where we brought Doa on, we are starting with Last Free Nation, some additional non-esports content for the first time. And what this means is we not only have new channels, which we'll put in the description below, we have a new social channel for Last Free Nation Culture, or LFN Culture on Twitter, Last Free Nation Culture on all the other platforms. It is Last Free Nation Culture on YouTube. And what's going on there is my new show with Doa, Nerd Legion, where we're going to be talking about kind of all the fantasy, sci-fi, nerd culture TV shows and movies that are coming out. This first episode is going to be about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which the new season debuts on Thursday. So you guys can look forward to that next week. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Please support us on the new social channels and the new YouTube channels as well. We're going to continue to put more content on that channel as we not only continue to bring you great esports coverage at Last Free Nation, but we're going to start moving into some other stuff as well. So enjoy. And if you have things you want from us, maybe shoot us a message at LFN Culture on Twitter, or Last Free Nation Culture on some of the other social media channels like TikTok or Instagram. And we will we'll take a look at that and consider that for the future. So that's what's going on currently with us. More content to come as the year goes on. So let's take a look at viewer questions. You want to touch briefly, Thorin, on like the I haven't been able to see Uzi's debut because it was overnight and we started the show at 8 a.m. my time this morning. But he has now come back to EDG. So one of the greatest players of all time returning to professional League of Legends. Thoughts?
I mean, the problem is Doublelift basically is the joke is he is Chinese ethnically, but he is the American Uzi I, because Uzi I also tried to take part of the fucking spring split off for 1,000,000 years in a row and used to not play until the Lunar New Year, and they'd bring in people like Abel, who's in that other team now. They'd actually be playing instead of him. So the problem I have with this move is, in theory, I like the idea of an all-time great player coming back, but it's been donkey's years since Uzi I was really good, guys. It's been fucking years and years and years. And spoiler, most of you saying, oh, Uzi I's back, I'm a huge fan, don't even know he did a comeback in BLG. You don't even know that. You're not even aware of it. And spoiler, it didn't work out well. So my issue is this. First of all, the doggo guy had already proven himself that he deserved that spot. And then secondly, not for probably the fucking salary he was being paid, mate. I bet he was being paid a king's ransom again. So my problem is this. Does he actually care? If he cares and he's actually back to try and be the best player in the world, I mean, you've probably joined too late to do that. Maybe next year's possible. But in theory, if you're good, fine. My problem is this. The player he's replacing was straight fire. The player he's replacing was going to be the next Uzi I, potentially. That guy Leave was one of the best rookie ADCs we have seen in a region that knows how to play around ADCs, and potentially could have been like a fucking EDG legend. So I'm not really a fan of this sort of like swap out. And then that's even why it was maybe even implied, like maybe that's why the news got leaked. So it's a way you could like bench that guy because of the whole PR thing going on. So I just, in general, my problem is I'm not as psyched about it. Like, essentially, can I get back old Uzi I? Brilliant. I don't know if that's what I'm getting. If I'm getting him turned up for just a paycheck and to be all right and to demand all the resources, that's where I don't like it. Because there's the other thing you have to mention. Uzi's game was the most selfish game of any League of Legends player in the history of League of Legends. And it was only justified because he was the absolute best player.
Yeah.
Like, you can actually argue RNG threw away Worlds by forcing the game to his way, even when the meta was solo lanes. But instead, they made it happen because they were the best team in the world, and they thought Uzi's going to carry us no matter what before he got Hjarned. So my problem is, if he's going to be that Uzi and it's going to be Raise the Poppy, then I'm not as big a fan of it, actually. Like, in general, like, if people don't know, the top laner of this team, you should remember, he used to be on fucking LNG. He is a fucking carry top laner. If you're a fan of Bin, you should be a fan of this guy getting to play carry champions. So is Uzi going to play responsibly? And when he's not the best player, allow other people to carry? Or is he going to have to say, put all the eggs in my basket again? Because if he does that, then I'm not in on the move, personally.
Yeah, I think to the point about him being on BLG, like, Doggo wasn't the issue on that team, which is why it was weird that they thought signing Uzi might be the fix. And I don't think Uzi was terrible, but I think that wasn't the difference maker. And I think what's unfortunate is, obviously, there was a significant amount of drama surrounding Leave, with the, allegations of hiring prostitutes that came out, which led to him being cut from the roster. And that's extremely unfortunate because he was such an outstanding up-and-coming player. Like, we spent a lot of time on this show and in Power Spike talking about him versus Pays as to, like, these 80 carry rookie phenomenons this year. And he was a core part of the success of that team's. So, it sucks, but I don't know if getting a probably washed Uzi is going to be the solution that team needs, because if anything, they were lacking star power, and Uzi being a star in the past does not make him a star in the present, right? All right, moving on. Questions. Would you ever consider a Hotline League style show? Because I'd pay-per-view that in a second to watch Thorin Dom lay into Reddit cretins. Well, we already have Thorin versus Reddit. So
here's the problem. I did it twice already, and none of you called in and none of you tuned in. So what I did was, I did a show. Are you ready? When I described this, Monty, it's going to sound like the greatest show of all time. Must have been crazy. It was called The People versus LS. And people who criticize LS on Reddit could call in and just get an actual argument with the man himself. Do you want to know what, Monty? No one did it. No one did it. People would just call in who were fans of his and just ask him basically to, like, talk more about a topic. None of the people who are so brave on Reddit and know so much more than LS would call in. I did the same thing with Veteran. When I did my Elitist United show, I did a show similar thing. Everyone was telling me he's so opinionated and just know what the fuck he's talking about. So I did a show called EU on the Line, and people could call in. And the joke was there'd be the odd one or two people slightly disagreed, but it was just his fans calling in to talk to him again. So the real problem is this. The reason Hotline League exists is because it is for fucking plebs. It is for dog shit Reddit NPCs to call in, and Travis and the rest of them will never tell you your opinion is wrong unless their fucking paid masters tell them to, and they will just basically field. It's like a really shit 80s fucking call-in show for sports. Like, and what do you think the Yankees should do now? And they, well, I think they should really do this, and then fire the GM. Well, that is an opinion. What do you think? We've got Bill on the line from upstate Yonkers, and he thinks actually they should bring back, like fucking Alex Rodriguez. Like, that's all it is. So the problem is, it sounds like a straight fire concept. Do you think I wouldn't like to have all the dickheads that think they know everything come one-on-one with me on a broadcast? Spoiler, there's a reason no player has ever gotten the best of me. There's a reason why Philip Aram was fucking floundering, hoping a life preserver would get thrown in. Because when you actually get dropped in here, this is what I do, motherfucker. When I can think really fast on my feet, and I have a fucking eidetic memory of everything that ever happened in my life in esports. So spoiler, you haven't got time to look on that Wikipedia. You haven't got time to go, well, that's an interesting point. Like, give me 10 minutes to think. There's no 10 minutes. You got 2 seconds, start talking, motherfucker. So the real problem is, it sounds fire, but as Monty says, the only real way it works is with one person, me or Monty. If it's like, Richard does it as well, where you just read the Reddit comment, you give your side. The Reddit would never be able to hold up. Like, the joke is 99% of Reddit criticism of players involves them stopping, pausing the game, or going back in a VOD and watching, counting the auto attacks, then going, he should have done 2 more auto attacks. But in this moment, no commentator could say that. Nobody has that fucking hindsight or godlike fucking prescience to comment live. So the real problem is, essentially, it's a better idea than the actual finished product would be, unfortunately. So I don't think it's worth it, unfortunately.
Right. Also, I mean, the reason why Travis Gafford does it is because Travis Gafford's whole shtick is making other people do Travis Gafford's content for Travis Gafford. You'll notice that
he's the Victorian fucking industrialist in the factory. Like, work for me, make me my profit, you fucking peons.
You'll notice that, like, you know, it's either him breaking news. So, by the way, he has, you know, despite claiming that he hasn't been a journalist, he has been doing a lot of journalistic work in terms of breaking news recently. That's the only content he ever does by himself, and it's 10 minutes long. Otherwise, it's interviews. Otherwise, it's, you know, think pieces by Mark Z on his channel. Otherwise, it's him quizzing players. Otherwise, it's viewers calling in and offering their own opinions. Like, Travis Gafford has no opinions of his own, and that's not LFN content. LFN content is about our people's opinions. That's what it is, not about your opinions. Hey guys, what is your favorite and or most impactful ultimate in the game to use and to watch in pro play? I mean, for me, it's Silas ult, right? Because that it can do so, obviously it can do so many different things in the game, and the way that Silas is played is entirely dependent on your opponent's team composition. So to me, it's Silas ult.
Here's the problem. This is where watching and playing are very different, Monty. Because when I play, I think Pykel is fucking awesome. I think Pyke should even go back to the old release one where you didn't have to move through the guy on the E as well, and it could just get every angle of person and stun them. But when I actually watch it, it's not actually as fun as being the person doing that, like most OP things. So I think if I had to pick mine, I would maybe say... I actually do think like Yasuo ult looks fucking sick and has like one of the most, like, it has the most oomph of any ult in my opinion. And you're just going in the center of the team fight, fucking everyone up. Like, I think Yasuo ult's pretty cool.
I mean, in terms of impact, like, it's hard to go away from a Malphite ult, right? Because it's easy to predict and dodge theoretically, but the actual impact of getting like a 5-man Malphite ult is fucking insane. Boring, so it's not my favorite, but impactful, yes. Who are some of your favorite literature/film critics, if you enjoy that kind of content? Well, one of my favorite film critics was A.O. Scott from the New York Times, but he has stopped being a film critic over there, although he did just write, because he was formerly a literature critic, he did just write about Cormac McCarthy, who very sadly died yesterday, who was my favorite author, living author. Is no longer living, unfortunately. So now he's among my favorite. Now he is among my favorite dead authors, but he was my favorite living author. So I like A.O. Scott's stuff. Literary critics, I mean, can't go wrong with Harold Bloom. I think amazing literary critic. Do you have any that you like? I mean, I like Red Letter Media for film critics now.
There's a famous, let me just look up the name of this guy. There's a famous guy in the UK who does it for like the BBC radio. His name is Mark Kermode, and this is where I'm so different to other people. I like punditry and critics, not so that they tell me my own opinion back to me or tell me what to think. I just like people that I find interesting, and I like some of their tastes, and then I actually like it sometimes when they don't like the book or the movie I like. So there's a guy called Mark Kermode who's a very famous film critic in the UK, and like every great thinker, like LS and all the rest of them, he has his own idiosyncrasies and thinks he's mega biased about, but that's part of the fun. It's why I enjoy Skip Bayless. So Mark Kermode's one. The guy called Alex Cox used to do some work back in the day, some straight fire stuff on TV. He also became a director and did like the movie Repo Man, if people have ever seen that classic one from the 80s. So there's a couple. I haven't really got any literary ones because, like, here's the thing in general. I like those people essentially for their personality and their thoughts. I don't actually know what, to me, I don't find most criticism very useful for like the purpose of finding or watching the shit. Like for example, in general, I actually notice with films, I tend to be the opposite of the critics' consensus. If they tell me this movie is the one that should win the awards, that tends to be like, yeah, it's not that good. Whereas when they're like, oh, this movie was overrated. Like, I'll give you an example. You know that movie Cloud Atlas that the Wachowskis made? Everyone said like, oh, it's so bloated and fucking shit, and the way it was executed wasn't good. It was a mess of a movie. I thought it was fucking brilliant. It was like a flawed gem. Yeah, had problems with it, but the ambition of the movie was incredible. I remember watching like, holy shit, how did they even attempt this in a movie, and all the ambitious like scene changes. So I like the opposite of what most critics like. So I have a couple of guys, but I don't have anyone for books.
Yeah, Cloud Atlas too is interesting because I've read the book and seen the movie, and I was very impressed that they were able to translate the book to film as well as they did, considering that the book itself is like this pastiche of very different styles. And it's like it's kind of non-linear as well. So I thought they did a very good job with the movie, given the source material. I'm not sure exactly what this means. Can each of you give a league storyline for your namesake, the Count and the Oakenshield? You can either frame it as a specific team, an org, or an individual player. For the sake of time, we can just do beginning, middle, and end. I don't know by league storyline what that means. I mean, look,
I think he means like the law behind our characters in league. Is that what he means?
I mean, I don't know. It says you can frame it as a specific team or an org or an individual player. So applying the Count of MonteCristo or Thorin Oakenshield to a narrative within League of Legends.
Right. It's, who would be the Thorin Oakenshield of League of Legends?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
I mean, I've done a pretty good job of Count of MonteCristoing myself in League of Legends, in that I was just a dude kind of doing my own shit, and I got too successful, and so people conspired to put me in jail, and then I escaped. I mean, I pretty much did that in League of Legends, right? And I found more wealth doing things in other places.
I guess the Thorin Oakenshield of League of Legends would, of course, be Double Lift, because he comes from a lineage of a once great people, in this case, NA players. Like, they actually ruled season 1, believe it or not. And in season 2, they were still a mighty people, but then they were sort of cast afar. The diaspora just took over. All these imports, invaders come in and took their ancestral homeland. But then Double Lift was there, old Thorin Oakenshield, willing to fight and lead the resistance. And basically, what happened when he finally got into a position where he was the king of his region again, Monty? Dragon sickness. The love of money destroyed him completely, and he tore apart the place that he once professed he would do. And spoiler, he basically just sent fucking Smaug recently to destroy whatever that was, Rivertown, which was all the other pro players, wasn't it? Who were all like, don't live in the fucking Misty Mountains or whatever. There you go. That's not bad. Half decent. I guess, yeah, go on.
ESL and Riot have a lot of influence and do a lot of harm to esports, but what individual does the most harm with the least influence?
With the least, I don't understand. How could you do harm with so little influence, though?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I'm just confused by the question.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. We'll move on. To Monty, in honor of the animation, what do you think of The Little Mermaid? You kind of went from Shining Sea to Korea. I don't know what that analogy is supposed to be. I mean, I like the original Little Mermaid. I'm not going to watch the live action Little Mermaid. I'm not going to watch any live action Disney movies ever because I don't want to, and I have no interest in them.
Also, it's not good. Like, I actually did watch that Lion King one, and it's just like a worse version of the Lion King. Like, for example, when you get to certain scenes that were mega in the animated, it's just different. And also, by the way, the sort of 3D animation part doesn't really work, mate. Actually, I don't know about you, Monty. I think graphics are so fucking overplayed in these movies. Yeah. They take me out of the movie, mate. I can't actually engage.
I prefer animation because it's a more interesting style. Like, for example, because I have a kid, like, I don't get to go out and watch very, very many movies, but I went out with my wife this weekend to watch the new Spider-Man movie, partially because I wanted to see it in big screen because of the animation. And I like the original Into the Spider-Verse animation style, and I wanted to see it on, like in a theater. The animation is amazing. So but I'm not going to go see whatever next live action Spider-Man film is. I'm not going to go see that in the theater. You know what I mean? Like, so I just prefer kind of seeing the animation in some of these movies versus live action pieces a lot of the time. I prefer that. So, and I think a lot of these Disney classics are very good films, but also, I mean, just as a joke to the point about The Lion King, like, The Lion King is already just a bad Hamlet. And then The Lion King live action is just a worse remake of a bad Hamlet. So now I'm just in like postmodern nightmare territory. So no, I will pass. Hold on. There's a question for you here. Okay. Yeah, I don't really know what that means, but okay, we'll just have to skip that one. Do you think that VC money will return to esports?
Paste it in the chat here, and if it's something I can decode.
No. You're just it's gonna tell you.
Oh, whatever.
Do you think that VC? I know when to withhold the information. Do you think that VC money will return to esports when the global economy recovers, or do they all understand now that there's no exponential growth to be had and the fad is over for good?
This was basically explained already by Monty. There's other reasons to buy in aside from making money. And also, Like, essentially, here's the thing. Certain people are burned, but some of them were already burned anyway. They invested so much. But I think as long as the money is available, the other thing you have to remember is there's a type of investor, especially funds, that are just trying to gamble. So they understand it's a gamble, but their point of their gamble is, look, most of them won't work out, but if it does, 100x the money. So there'll be people who will still invest. Yeah, there'll be some people. Once it comes back, but it's one of those rising tide carries all ships scenario.
It's also VC comes in many different forms, right? There's very aggressive VC funds that are only going to they're only going to invest in things that are going to potentially like return an enormous amount of their money. So they're going to take 100 gambles and hope that one does really well, right? That's what tech VC funds do a lot. There's also different kinds of VCs. So there's family funds. So, very rich families, they may not want to hit that home run, but they may see that there's an opportunity to make money in the long run. And even if it's not 100x return, they'll be happy if it's a 10x return, right? Or if it's a 5x return. So there's just so many different kinds of investors, and the level of risk versus, upside that they're looking for, that it will return, guys. It will return when the global economy recovers. The problem is that, we need the Fed to stop increasing interest rates and increasing the cost of borrowing, because as long as the Fed has high interest rates, there's just better ways to potentially return your money and less risk, or more, I should say, more risk in putting that money in VC. So who knows? But VC hasn't gone away in esports. There's always going to be somebody who can find an angle. To Monty, are there any F1 drivers you compare to LoL pros? I'm always comparing Score to Fernando Alonso as great players overlooked because they didn't win as much due to team issues, for example. That's an interesting one. I'm not sure I'm that knowledgeable about F1 to make these kind of comparisons. I'm not sure I'm comfortable doing this because I think I will do it wrong. So I like your comparison, though, with what I know. I would not consider myself an F1 expert. Do you think NA GOAT level players such as Doublelift, Bjergsen, or Jensen would have had a more outstanding career domestic internationally if they played in the LEC, considering NA has such a shallow depth of talent? Or is there some native LA talent you think you would suit and thrive better in LEC than they did in LCS, like maybe Dardoch? I think Dardoch probably would have done better in LEC than LCS, just because I think Europeans are culturally less sensitive to his kind of hard-driving behavior. I think all of those people, Doublelift, Bjergsen, and Jensen, would have done better in LEC.
Here's the thing.
I'm not sure that's controversial.
If you just mean to play, then yeah. Like, for example, if Doublelift was on the 2019 G2, he'd have a way better chance to win Worlds, wouldn't he? He could have won the MSI. He's that good that he could have been in one of these teams. The problem I have is this. It's more their demeanor. Like, spoiler, I hope this isn't a crazy concept that you might not have thought of. Bjergsen and Jensen are Danish, so I think they'd be fine in Europe, actually, believe it or not. But the Doublelift one, the only question I would have is this. Doublelift, to me, does seem like the sort of pleb that needs to have, like, fucking In-N-Out burger 1 kilometer from his house and have like, what the hell, they're speaking another language on TV? Like, he does seem a bit like a fucking idiot like that. So I just don't know if he could be outside American culture where people actually might notice, like, dude, is English your native language? You know what I mean? Like, he's not that smart. So I think he needs to be in LA. He deserves to be in LA in California his whole life.
Do you enjoy song with lyrics in languages other than English? If so, give an example of a language and a song you enjoy. Well, I like opera, so, Italian, German, these are way up there, like Verdi, Wagner. Now, contemporary songs with lyrics in languages other than English, I don't listen to. I have a very literary background, and so I'm very interested in lyrics in general. So I will like bands that maybe other people don't like because of the way they sound, because I like their lyrics a lot. So a band like that would be like the Hold Steady, which I really like, but a lot of people don't like Craig Finn kind of like drunkenly rambling over guitar riffs. So for me, lyrics in English are pretty important to modern music that I listen to.
I'm not someone who's like, this is one of the things I've always despised about K-pop stands. At least the modern ones do actually learn what the lyrics are and they realize, right? Because half of what people think's cool about the lyrics is that you just don't understand Korean. So you're thinking like, oh, this is super sick. You don't know that the reason you don't listen to pop music in your country is when it's just like, baby, baby, where you going? Why you come back? Like, that's garbage. You know, it's just trash. But because it's in another language, your brain goes, ooh, it's mysterious. And what could they be talking about? So I don't listen to foreign languages I don't understand. There is one example though, because it's kind of a cheat, which is if you know the brilliant post-rock band Sigur Rós, they technically sing in a language they invented called Hopelandic, which is like a mixture of their native Icelandic with like almost like Tolkien level shit. So that's just more like an aesthetic thing. And in their case, it's mainly the actual music behind it I'm listening to. They're more one of those bands that's using the guy's voice as an instrument as opposed to like to express meaning, because obviously I don't know what they're saying in the words. So that's the one example I can think of. It's an exception to the rule for me.
Yeah. It also suits Sigur Rós' style. You know what I mean? As you said before, the biggest weakness of Vitality is they don't have an identity, and trading players wouldn't really solve the issue. Why haven't they changed the coaching staff or at least picked up Yamato Cannon? He's great at finding a team's strength.
What team was this?
Vitality. I mean, I think trading players might solve the issue. That's the thing. Like, I think that's the thing with Vitality is that perhaps they have too many disparate kind of star level players and not enough role players within the roster, right? Like, I think trading players might solve some of those problems to help them get all on the same page, or at least identify a style. But I agree. I mean, Yamato Cannon, I think he's fine, at least from our conversations with him. He's kind of chilling right now because he wants a good offer to come along. And why would, like, if I'm Yamato Cannon, why would I join a team that has those massive like egos and histories that those players have? Because if they don't listen to me, then I look stupid. He's not hurting for money, guys. He's fine.
Well, there's one thing already everyone's assumed, right? I'm just going to say this right now. I think that the greatest fucking two coaches in the history of sports is Bill Belichick and Phil Jackson. And do you know what? Even they have had players who don't think they're that good and who were fucking resentful of them and who were bad behavior inside their teams. In the case of Phil Jackson, it was mainly when he was like executive of the Knicks. But even they've had times where they can't get a player to buy in. So this notion that these guys have like mutant ability, 9 out of 10 level ability to charismatically convince people to do what they want, that doesn't exist. Like, that only works in certain scenarios with certain players. And spoiler, with players like Perks and Upset, they have to choose if they want to buy in. They don't have to because they're Perks and Upset. And by the way, as Monty says, if the team goes south and they fuck up your job and you get fired, they just go to another team for millions of dollars. Like, they're playing a different game than you. So already, I don't think it's as simple as just add Yamato Cannon because he's great on shows. By the way, like, did he do that good? Here's the thing I'll say. I do think he is a good coach, but I will say he got on paper a really good roster last year, never won a split. So it's not an automatic success story because it depends on the players. Then I'll add this in. Here's another reason why they might not do it. Because the current coach they've got, I'm going to guess, was requested by some of the players. And spoiler, he did just finish third in the last split. Like, in your mind, yeah, but he didn't win. Third's still decent. And it was the first split where they had upset. And then that's the final detail. Why not just trade for more players? Guys, they signed one of probably the most expensive players in the league, one of the best players in the league, Upset, just in the last split. By the way, these questions are why, at the end, Monty, when the fan goes, why are these orgs spending so much money? The second they don't win the league, you're telling them to buy the next greatest player in the whole league, change your whole team, change everything. It's like, and then you're like, why didn't you build? I can't become a fan of this. Like, so they've already changed to one of the best players, and the coach already got them the third. Right. So here's what I would say. If I'm Vitality, I might next year change a player, but I'm at least going to see how summer plays out. Like, remember, Upset only played for one split. I'm at least going to give him like a second split to bed in and see how the team does and all that jazz. Also, in my opinion, one of the bigger problems Vitality had is that Bo played in the LPL, but he only played regular season games, and Photon was nobody. Well, who are the guys who choked in the playoffs? Bo and Photon. I've got to give them a chance to bed in, actually get going. Like, I want to see Photon when he's played a few more stage games, when he's played in a final, maybe when he goes to Worlds. Like, I'm not just cutting these guys overnight. I think actually people who think like you should cut Bo or whatever, I think you're out of your mind, mate. I would at least let it ride for the rest of the year.
Well, also, they did make a coaching change this year, which is to bring Carter on. And Carter actually did, I think, a lot of really good work at Misfits, min-maxing the talent on his roster. Like, I don't know if VTO wins MVP. Yeah, without Carter kind of playing to his strengths. So I think Carter's a good coach. So we can even ask, is it a coaching problem in the first place? I'm not sure it is. It's well established that both of you are well read, be it reading all sorts of books or just deconstructing the usual esports statements / announcements. What are your takeaways from decades of doing so? For example, do you think it's slow and steady wins the race, or do you sometimes just have to brute force the information, hoping for it to stick in the long run by reading repeatedly? So basically the question is, how do you read or learn to deconstruct things? I mean, you just do it more. It's a practiced skill, just like anything else. And instead of passively reading, actively reading by reading things, as you say, repeatedly and thinking about them, slowing it down. This is why I found, this as an aside, because the hilarious thing about tech bros is that they feel like they have to just like optimize everything for speed. And so there were people who were bragging about like the number of books they were reading every year on Twitter. And like, if you're reading that many books that quickly, I don't think the information's actually going in, because if you're reading really deep literature or philosophy, oftentimes the author is extremely intelligent and it takes several readings of a passage to kind of, let it sink in. Sometimes you just want to read a chapter and not blow through a book because you want to kind of ruminate about it for a while before you move on. Like, I could blow through Moby Dick. Does that mean that I'm getting, the maximum amount as opposed to just like reading a chapter a day and percolating in that literature? Like, no. So I don't know. I think I'm skeptical of that kind of reading.
I'm just going to say, if someone took a clip and just removed some of the words, Monty did just say the words, I blow dick. But like, if you just remove, he said that, not me. So,
well, thank you.
Also, I would just say, I mean, in my case, that's actually what my entire field is supposed to be. It's why I actually look down on some of the bigger name journalists that I know just go to people and go, so what should I think about this? And then some orgo that tells him, oh, it's all like this. And he just repeats that. What you do is you use journalistic skills, the same skills that allow you to fact check things, to see what people are saying. So you learn how to corroborate sources and check a piece of information or how it was presented. You look at the macro picture to ask yourself, does this person have a track record of telling the truth? Do they lie? What are their biases? Then you dive into the micro, like learn, for example, go to someone like Harris and go, actually, what would be the legal precedents for how like contract law would work in this way? Then you go back to what the owner said about the way his contracts are, and you apply that and go, is he telling the truth? Does this seem like it makes sense? Essentially, there is no shortcut to it. It's essentially like becoming, in this case, it's like a sort of meta-contextual. You're becoming like an expert at parsing other experts. But that's essentially what the job of a journalist is, quite frankly. So I would hope anyone who did that job gets good at this over time, even though some people have shown to the opposite.
Congrats on 200 episodes. Is there an LFN business address in case you want to send you stuff? Not yet. What is your favorite scene from a historical movie? I love historical dramas. So let me think here. There's tons of them. Probably some of the on-ship scenes from Master and Commander. They're extremely historically accurate, by the way, especially the battles. I've read a lot of nonfiction and fiction about the Napoleonic era of the British Navy. And so those are really, really good. But there's tons of stuff like, I don't know, Gladiator, the fighting scenes and those are not necessarily the most realistic, but they do have a lot of weight and like I think do a good job of presenting the period. A lot of the scenes from Rome, the HBO show, I think are very interesting, especially when Varenus and Polo are around historical Roman events that occurred, because they're kind of like, background characters, but you get their perspective as to major things that happened in the triumvirate period and the establishment of the Roman Empire from the Republic. So these are all, I don't know, you have any historical movie scenes that you like?
I can, but it's more like here's the real problem. It's In the same way as in the modern day, people will get an amazing quote from like Aristotle, and then they'll Google it, and the fact check will say, actually, Aristotle never said this, or he said like a not as good version. That's because part of what makes things awesome is the artistic license that someone comes along with and makes a quote better, or like emphasizes the coolest fact. So, for example, a lot of people will have heard that quote that everyone was saying when Rings of Power came out, Monty, where there's a quote from Tolkien where it says something like, you know, evil cannot create, it can only take what good has made and then twist it. He never said that. What he actually said was one of the characters in the show, they just comment on him, the fact that like, it's like essentially the gist of it was that, but it wasn't phrased as awesome as that. Someone sexed it up and then it got repeated on the internet as a quote. Now, to me, that's cool because it's actually still a true quote in the sense that the spirit of it is true to the idea. It's just not as well, it wasn't as technically crafted in the original. So what I'm getting to here is like, spoiler, almost nothing in Gladiator or Troy or any of these movies, all the good shit we're talking about didn't actually happen. It's like some artistic license with those characters. So with that said, there is actually in one of my favorite movies, A Man for All Seasons, the story of Thomas More and Henry VIII. Without spoiling it, it's literally a historical thing. You can go look on Wikipedia what happened. There's just an awesome scene that always makes me laugh, even though it's actually a movie with a lot of like fucking, it's like a very poignant movie. It's a very somber movie. It's got a lot of like essentially like downer elements, but also it's like a movie about like righteousness and telling the truth and never giving in. But there's just a scene late in the movie, without spoiling too many details, where there's this figure that the main character, he was like the understudy type guy of this main character, and the guy came to him. He's called Rich. He's actually played by John Hurt, the actor who died a few years back. He comes to the main character, Thomas More, and he says to him, you know, like make me, I can't remember what the title is, make me some sort of position and you know I'll do a good job. And he tells him early on in the movie, I won't do that because essentially you don't have the right character for this, like the character traits, like it would corrupt you and you wouldn't be good at it. So he says, I'm gonna have to send you away, I can't do this. Well, later on in the movie, that's the guy that basically, spoiler, they actually use to betray this main character and say that, you know, privately he said something that he didn't say because this guy was close to him. And so he essentially purges himself in court, Monty, and just says like a lie that like he did do this so that they can fuck over the Thomas More guy. Because if people remember the story, Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce from his wife so he could marry someone else, but at the time the Catholic Church didn't allow that, right? So what happens is there's this scene where it turns out that this guy betrayed the main character in order to be some sort of like political position in Wales, right? And so there's this amazing line where he says something like, you know, he quotes that scripture from the Bible, you know, what does it benefit a man to give up his whole soul for the entire world and all the riches? And then he does this whole thing and then he says, but for Wales, Rich, for Wales. And it's just one of the funniest scenes ever in like a really serious movie ever. It's sheer fire and also just regional humour in it, if you know Wales. And I've always wanted to say to Richard Lewis, for Wales, Rich, for Wales, he's from Wales. I never had the right moment, unfortunately, on a desk or something. And it's a bit over everyone's head as reference, let's be real.
Well, you are a scumbag for spoiling real history of
I'm going to watch that movie. They're never going to watch that movie anyway, so it's all good. It's an awesome movie, but it's just people talking. There's no action, so you have to be into that. But if you're not like people who are righteous, it's a fucking banger movie.
Yeah, and you can also, I mean, if you are interested in that, you can also read/watch the TV show for Wolf Hall, which is it's not the same author or actors or anything, but it's a continuation of that history into Thomas Cromwell. So to Thorin, I was curious what Premier League team you support. I am from the north of England, Newcastle United fan, and if you follow any northern teams specifically, you do.
The problem is, where I was born, I'm not going to go into it, is not a place with a major team that was ever good. So I never supported like that. It was more like my family just always supported Liverpool. Now, obviously, there was a bunch of years where they weren't that good and they were just hanging around, but now it's obviously mega because they're really good again. So yeah, Liverpool, there you go. By the way, mainly because I tend to pick teams for like the stylistic aspect. And if you know, Liverpool is probably one of the most stylistically coherent teams in the history of football, where they always have like not quite all the best players, but a few like genius players who are either attacker or midfielder, who have a lot of individual flair. And also it's about like the spirit of Anfield and all that shit. So it's just a cool team to support.
Okay, so let's go into... Oh my God, we're not going to be able to get all these questions, guys. I'm sorry. There's too many. if Faker is the Max Verstappen supreme sporting robot of League of Legends, who is the Fernando Alonso, somebody with longevity, bravado, ambition, but who also arguably, I'm adding this part, who also arguably underperformed potentially due to their teams. I mean, I think Rookie's probably in that category as well, where, Rookie, because of the circumstances of his employment and the decisions, like his decisions of which teams to be on, has arguably underperformed relative to his individual strength.
I mean, he's been straight up hinted by teammates that stopped him going to Worlds a bunch of times, and winning championships, absolutely.
But yeah, his longevity is amazing, and also his individual skill is amazing, and he's also much more of a personality than Faker is. Here's an interesting one. What do each of you want your esports legacy to be?
I mean, in general, what people don't know is half the shit I do on these shows or in like Explode, that's not my main thing. My main thing was about trying to tell the stories in the coolest way possible. But I always didn't want it to be like what the mainstream does, where they just take a shit archetype and force it over a player. I want to know enough about the player and the game that I can draw out the story. Like if you see those short videos we do on the LFN channel, the reason why those are fire is because part of that isn't a narrative I made up. I sort of like am able to intuit and draw out the essence of Deft or Jensen or whoever it is and tell it in a way where, you notice it doesn't have to have anything to do with the game. It's just like a powerful story because it's a human story and about things like conquest and battle and overcoming the odds and refining your talent and outdoing people's expectations. So I would say to be that sort of person, like essentially it's the area I think I'm the most effective. Like I've told this story before in certain ones of my videos, but there are certain mega pro players in Counter-Strike who hate when I like criticize them on the desk or do like a video saying, I think you should remove this guy from the team. But even they have come up to me at after parties. And when I did, like, for example, when I would write the intros for some of the majors of what the guy would read out with the movie voice, when they found out I wrote that, some of them even came to me like, that's amazing. Like, whatever you were doing there, just do more of that. I think it's the best thing you've ever done. So I would just say that.
I think when, my esports career is finished, the most important thing to me is that I stood up for my own beliefs in this space and made it a better place for other people to exist in. And I think for me, it's about the reason why we're doing Last Free Nation now is because we want to be able to create an independent talent-owned entity, because the talent never get to own anything in this space. It's the teams that get to own shit. It's the players. It's the publishers. The players can own parts of the teams. The team owners own the teams themselves, obviously. The publishers own the intellectual property in the leagues, but the personalities never really get anything. And like, I would rather have people remember me for standing up very publicly when things are going wrong or when unethical things are occurring, even at cost to myself. And that's why I think people misunderstand. They think like, because it's what they want, they project themselves onto me and say, well, Monty, why aren't you, casting anymore? Or, why didn't you just go along with Riot? And then you could be the one in the arena with your voice over the loudspeakers. And my answer to that is I've already done that, and it has lost its luster. Do I think it's fun? I absolutely do. Right. But that is so much lower priority to me than creating my own business and being able to present myself in the way that I want to. And I wish a lot of the time that those things weren't mutually exclusive. But the fact is that my more important duty to this industry is to call out bullshit that needs to be called out rather than having a good time shouting in a stadium. And I take that duty very seriously. So
it is annoying as fuck, that thing you're talking about, where, like, as you say, they just imagine that they LARP as you, and then they're like, you should just want to cast LCK again. It's like, I don't even want to live a career again necessarily, or do that again. It's like, the problem is, I can give you the analogy that I had to learn about, but I didn't get it myself when I was a fan, right? Like every fan, I used to want my favorite bands to get, like, I want the Smiths to get back together, Monty, until I realized, wait a minute, dude, that was like 50 years ago now.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That was a time in their lives. It wouldn't be the same. And they're allowed to do other things. They already did the Smiths. So in that sense, I have the same thing, because everyone always tells me now, like, if you actually change your attitude and stop talking shit, the TOs might hire you again. First of all, I did the most majors ever of any fucking analyst. I nailed that already. And then secondly, I'm the one who said I wouldn't work with the TOs. Like, you haven't even got the fucking facts right on this one, guys.
Right. And also, by the way, this is a conversation that is had behind the scenes, and I have repeatedly and frequently with other League of Legends casters. And it goes like this. And it's the same thing that happened to me. I won the game of casting League of Legends. I was the most famous League of Legends caster. It was unsatisfying. I wanted to learn how to do other things with my life. I wanted to be part of the creation of Overwatch League because I was never going to get that opportunity with League of Legends. In League of Legends, it was just going to be going to another cast again. And it's not that I didn't enjoy that, but I wanted to grow my professional skill set. I wanted to do other things. And frankly, like, if we're just being objective here, I'm glad you guys like me casting, but the best good I can do for this industry is by doing what we're doing right now, which is being a voice that can be independent and honest and help create a business of which other people can benefit from. And it's not casting the games. That's just you being selfish about what you want me to do. It's not where my duty and my ethical duty lies. My ethical duty lies in doing this. What are some of your favorite character relationships? Could be romantic, friendship, mentorship, rivalry in film literature. For example, Paul and Duncan from the Dune series, or the two main characters from The Prestige. Also, thanks for all the content you bring to the scene. It wouldn't be the same without you. Do you have some personal...
I mean, The Prestige is one of my two favorite movies. So actually, I do think the like dynamic between those. It's partly because the actors are also mega, and it's a very well written movie. That's a really good, like, essentially, that's one of the best rivalry dynamics I've ever seen. Because what makes that one great is it's actually how all great male rivalries are. They start on something incredibly small, like we're just competing, or you've minorly slighted me. Then they become like, because the resentment builds, like, now I actually hate you, and now I'm battling, and then at the end, maybe I even want to kill you. Maybe you just die at me. And so when the stakes keep rising like that, I think those make for the best rivalries. Those are the most fun ones. Definitely, you're right up there. What about you? What have you going for?
The all-time classic, Lucifer versus God in Paradise Lost. hard to get more epic than those stakes. What other relationships do I enjoy in fiction? I love kind of conflict and antagonistic relationships. So Ahab versus the White Whale is philosophically extremely interesting, and that conflict is one of my favorites. Going back to something I talked about in Rome, I think the Varinus Titus Polo relationship in Rome is extremely interesting and very well written. I love that series. What else do I like? There's tons.
I mean, I can't spoil the concept, but one of the reasons why the anime, one of the only ones I recommend, the Legends of the Galactic Heroes, is good, is because the two main characters, like, already semi-spoiler, but they also have an amazing sort of contrast and dynamic, basically.
Would you consider Gen G and T1 an all-time LCK rivalry? Well, at this point, yes. I mean, how could it not be? The number of series that they've been in, the Faker versus Chovy narratives that are happening. I mean, even think about, now they have a coaching rival. It's fucking Bengi versus Score as coaches as opposed to as junglers. Like, it's a pretty great rivalry, you gotta say. So, yes. Construct the shittiest league roster with players who have won worlds. Note the shittiest players at their peak. I mean, the shittiest players who have won worlds. It's different. Okay. Different than being in a world's finals. I mean, probably a lot of these people are just going to be early days. I mean, it's obviously like Fnatic from season 1, like all of them.
I mean, I don't count them as winning worlds, but yeah. Okay.
That's the easy answer.
I mean, you could do a lot of them. Like, obviously, there's some people from TPA, like maybe Bebe is the fucking ADC.
Yeah. I mean, Mistake as well. Like, yeah, Mistake as well was probably not that good even back in the day.
I mean, even though he did play well, King in the top lane, I just do not believe is that good. Come on, the Shy won worlds, bro. King.
I would say Kingen over Looper, because at least Kingen at his peak at winning worlds was actually the MVP of the series, and I think won that legitimately. So, like, Looper is probably a good one in the top lane. Baolan is probably another one. Some of them. So there you go.
The problem
We'll
is,
do-
I noticed the only one that doesn't suck is pretty much, except for like you can argue Crown, but most of the mid laners that won were pretty good.
Yeah.
It is the best
Yeah.
position, so it's hard to do mid lane, I think.
We'll do a couple more questions, guys. Then if you have pressing questions, you guys can ask them in future episodes. But we're already over 3.5 hours, so we have to cap it at some point. Had T1 won MSI and Worlds 2022 as well as LCK Spring 2023, how much wider would the gap between Faker and the rest of the GOAT contenders be? I don't know if it changed that much, because like I think Faker was really good this year regardless, and I think even though he didn't win, his individual performance this spring helps add to his legacy. He was very good this spring.
I don't get it. Like, logically, by this guy's logic, Faker should role swap to support and play with JDG. And then when he wins everything, now he's better than Knight can ever be, even though Knight carried him to the wins. Like, this is the reason why the question is insane. Because if you'd have said, if Faker single-handedly won Worlds, LCK, then how much bigger would the gap be? Huge. But if Faker is just on a team where his even playing style is not to be the carry, how would that make him a greater individual player in terms of that? Like, I think team accomplishments applied to star players is the stupidest premise ever, because even in sports like the NBA, it has a loose correlation. Like, if people don't know, Michael Jordan was already being talked about as the greatest basketball player on his second championship, because he already was cracked out of his mind before he ever won the championship. So it's the same reason why I actually look down on people, not who think Tom Brady is the greatest, but who say there's no debate. The only debate we can't have is whether you have a brain or not. There's like 53 players on a team, and spoiler, his defense won most of the fucking rings. So to me, it's just a nonsense question. Like, if he was Knight right now and he won everything, it would count a lot. But Faker hasn't been that superstar carry for fucking donkey, like half a decade or more. So to me, it wouldn't change anything. I actually think that's overblown.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Tom Brady also had Belichick, which is a massive advantage. And when he changed teams, he went to an insanely stacked Bucks roster. He didn't fucking go to a bottom tier team and then carry them screaming to a title.
I'm just good at remembering these things, guys. Tom Brady has never won a Super Bowl ring without a top 10 ranked defense. Case closed.
And Bill Belichick is also a defensively minded coach. So yes, I firmly disagree with the Brady is the GOAT takes that go around.
I mean, you can have it, but it's like the way that was framed. Like, there's no debate. You just put everyone else in the dirt. It's like that's the part I can't handle. That's the part that triggers me. You can have the opinion. It's just a different opinion, but that's the part that triggers me.
Congratulations on winning the TSM Holy War. Thank you. I wanted to say a sincerest thank you to you both for the entertainment, banter, and information over the years. After watching Thorin's video about Frankie, I also watched that, Thorin. It was very good. He really shone a light on a bigger problem in society by not admitting being wrong, hypocrisy, and a general lack of principles. How would you fix some of these problems in esports? I mean, the Frankie video, in my opinion, before you give yours, Thorin, was that I think the video has to be made because what people get away with is having all of these kind of individual takes over the years that in isolation can seem very poignant, or I'm not going to say correct, but like they're designed in the moment to kind of have an emotional response that makes people view you positively. But the problem is when you put all of the takes together, you can really like show the web of how disingenuous the behavior is, because there's not actually an underlying principle there. It's basically manipulating crowd opinion to make yourself look good. And I think that how would you fix some of these problems is by doing the kind of content that you did. I don't know any other way to fix it, because people, companies are always going to manipulate you guys on these issues. It's the whole thing. Like, you see these companies coming out in esports about Pride Month while they simultaneously censor any discussion of Pride Month in certain countries that they want to make money from. You know what I mean? So it's not,
which proves they don't believe in it.
Yeah, they are not doing it for principle. You do things for principles, even though it might cost you something. That's what having principles,
because of that.
Especially, yes, especially when it might cost you something. Otherwise, you just don't have principles. You're just virtue signaling.
Put it this way, I think that video should be the best example ever of the principle that Monty outlined, which is why would you ever fuck with investigative journalists? They can investigate you.
It's so stupid. People keep doing it though, Thorin. Like, if I were these people, like, I would be very careful about antagonizing people like you and Richard, because you have the tools and the willpower to expose it. So, like, just don't fuck with them. Just don't.
This was the craziest as well to me, because as you saw in the video, if you want to know why it's so long, she couldn't stop doubling down and commenting for years again and again. So eventually, like, the joke is, I just use her own words against her by the end. I don't even have to guess what she's thinking. You can just see over the year. She might have mentioned it like 50 times over a 5 year span. It's like, just stop fucking sending the tweets. So, but she couldn't do it, so she did it to herself. If she'd only done the first one, I'd look mad unreasonable making that video, Monty. People are like, wow, really blown this out of account. Actually, the joke is, guys, to this day, she's still tweeting about that shit pretty much. So just what that every now and then you have to allow yourself a guilty pleasure like that of just going, you know what? Fuck this person, actually. It's like I always say from the movie Heat, I'll make time for Wayne Grow. You know what? We can get to the airport later. Let's go off here, love. I'm just going to have to cap this motherfucker in a video game Minecraft metaphorically.
I mean, I just find it hilarious. And that's why, you could tell who's a real person by who actually stands up for their beliefs when it costs them something. And I respect that. Frankie is not one of those people. Or she is, but there are limits. My recent purchase of a Freezebong Pipe XL has made smoking too enjoyable. The glycerin chamber is ready in just an hour, and the smoke chilled by over 300 degrees is too smooth to avoid. Do you guys have any strategies for productivity or time management? I don't know.
You could always use the code LFN for 10% off, and then take the 10% that you saved and pay someone to remind you to do all the things you need to do.
That's a freebie for you, FreeSpipe. FreeSpipe's coming back to our shows in July. They haven't gone anywhere, guys. Don't worry. FreeSpipe's still here.
Does he mean productivity when
you're taking a break?
When you're smoking or before you smoke? Because I would say the main thing is this. Don't ever do the wake and bake thing if you want to be productive. What I would suggest you do is plan your day out so you get all your work done, and then have like the evening or something, and then you can just chill out and do whatever the fuck you want. I'd just be responsible like that.
I concur with that strategy.
One thing, I will give a pro tip though. The pro tip is this: if you're someone who doesn't smoke a lot, the problem is when you get really high, you're going to be distracted. You're going to start watching like a million YouTube shots. Prepare everything before. A bit like if your mum was doing your birthday party as a kid, you can have like the clown at 4, then the balloons, then they open the presents. Like, do that. Like, get the movies all ready on your PC, all paused in VLC. Get the fucking some tabs open. Get the candies all around. Then get high. Now you can't forget anything. It's all just there. You just go at that point. Yeah. And
you can see how we did that by watching our 420 special, where we literally curated an entire list of videos to watch before we, enjoyed. And that way it was all there, and we could create great content for you guys. What old game needs a remake or re-release? The obvious answer to this is a fully voice-acted Planescape Torment. I want a fully voice-acted 500,000 lines of text or whatever the fuck that is in that game, remade with a current graphics engine. Planescape Torment, bring it back.
And if you're going to use live-action actors, just have Nice play one of the characters, one of the zombies.
Jesus.
I didn't make him look like that. God did. Take it up with him. Take it up with the big man upstairs.
So, Planescape Torment. You guys can actually play that game now. Highly recommended, but that would be great. Do you have an old game that you wanted to see remade?
The problem is most games have been cynically remade a million times over. So, for example, my favorite game is Frontier Elite 2, but they've done a game like that was even like a semi-online version of that, where it's basically it's a bit like EVE Online, if people know the concept. So most of the games know. So the problem is as well, I also think a lot of what makes games really good is the limitations of the hardware and what the era was. And so, like, for example, people might know a lot of platform games, it's not really the game anymore because it was more of a 2D concept, wasn't it? So if I had to think of one I would want, the obvious one is this. Now, what I'm going to do right now, Monty, is do what I do with the Matrix, which is I just decide it's a shame there wasn't a sequel to The Matrix. It was a really awesome movie. It was very provocative how it ended. I always wondered what could have happened. And I really love to imagine what the place Zion could be like. Sounds really cool. It's a shame we never got to find out. So similarly, Monty, I've always thought the classic 2000 game, Deus Ex, really deserved a sequel. I'd love to see a sequel to that game. It's a shame no one made any.
So I'm a huge Deus Ex fan, huge. And they actually did do I haven't played it, but I understand they did a pretty good remake of the original Deus Ex game. I've been wanting to play it. Deus Ex 2 was fucking terrible. Deus Ex Human Revolution was pretty good. And then the one after that was not as good. So they've kind of been up or down, but I actually thought Human Revolution was a pretty good game. I like the concept and I like the art style on that. Okay, we'll do 2 more questions. There's too many questions, guys. I'm sorry. Riot changes the jungle meta constantly to keep the game fresh. If you had to do something similar, would you choose another role to modify instead? No, I would not change the rules. I would do less role changing. That's part of the big problem with League of Legends is that it's changed too much. Be more like Counter-Strike. Fewer changes. More continuity.
I would just do this. It's actually pure hypocrisy because my original favorite player, this would fuck, but I would actually make it so that the top lane can only pick tanks and bruisers. They don't even have carries because it would streamline the game so much. And I play bot lane. And then basically then every team would be about star mid laner and ADC. And then the top laners are just tanks and bruisers. Also, I'm friends with Lord Ramner. So there's a lot of bias and idiosyncrasy wrapped into this take and Flame retired years ago. So fuck y'all. You don't get carries anymore. If he didn't get carries in season 4, you don't get carries now, okay? All right, Ale and Bin, get the fuck off those carries. Get on a tank. Put him on fucking Maokai.
What franchise chain has the best burger for you and in what country? Because they do vary by country sometimes.
Okay.
Fast food burgers. Okay. I would say for me, it's probably Shake Shack has the best burger. In-N-Out, mad overrated. If I have to pick somewhere that's more commonly around the world or like has more locations, I probably pick Wendy's as having the best burger.
Wendy's has a good sort of home burger style, like
Exactly.
the classic American dining. I always thought that was underrated, actually. Anytime I'm at an airport, I've gone to those loads of times. Here's the problem. Because he said burger and he can be loose with that, I think the Chick-fil-A sandwich is fire.
Oh, Chick-fil-A is
delicious.
bagging.
I think that's very, very good. When I was in Atlanta, they actually used to sometimes have days of catering where they just brought that in. I was like, they actually, unironically, this is why me and Richard just gained weight there. They would just bring in, Monty, for catering, like a giant table full of those sandwiches and even like extra portions. And obviously there was too much. And it was like, how are you going to eat one and then just go in the other room knowing that a table of it's just in there? So that's
also,
one. Go on.
Also, Chick-fil-A has the best nuggets. Just putting that out there.
Okay.
Best nuggets.
I know how nuggets are made, so I'll never eat chicken nuggets in my entire life. And then the other one is, even though people are going to go, oh, it's such a fucking mid-take or whatever, you make the burger, you dumb fuck. You pick what's on it. I think that fucking Five Guys burger is delicious. Because I know exactly. I actually like the fact it's automatically a custom burger. It doesn't come over. So what you do, you learn exactly what you like, what condiments you like. Do you want pickles? Do you not? Do you want one patty? Do you want not? By the way, pro tip: everyone normally goes and gets the 2 patty. I get the little one with just 1 patty. It's way better. Essentially, I like the home burger style more, Monty. I don't want it to be like a McDonald's style or whatever. It's not my style as much.
Yeah. So I like Five Guys too.
And also, if people want, on YouTube, you can type in CS Summit Thorin food reviews. And when I was there in 2018, I reviewed a whole bunch of items off their menu. And spoiler, straight fire comedic. You just go watch it. I'm making all sorts of banger fucking banter in it. Just go watch it. It's classic. All the American classics.
Yeah, honestly, I think most fast food is good though. Otherwise, they wouldn't be as popular as they are. So, maybe don't eat it every day, but I think most of the fast food restaurants are pretty good. All right, we'll do one more question because I like it. What is your favorite alcoholic drink and what types of alcohol do you dislike the most?
I mean, man, simple. It's actually Monchi that introduced me to it. It's an amaretto sour. Just instead of a whiskey sour, you put amaretto in. It tastes really delicious. What's great is this, Monty. I have inadvertently converted so many people to drink that drink from esports. Because here's what would happen, Monty. We'd be in a bar at an event or the after party where it's an open bar and you have to order your drink. And I would order that. And you can imagine they all just turn to me because they're all Europeans, Monty. And they go, what's that? Looks like a bloody girl's drink. And I go, it's fucking delicious. And they go, can I have a taste? And then when they sip it, it's like LSD. They realize, wait a minute, I don't have to pretend to like beer. They're just all ordering them, mate. When I come back a few events later, they're like, what, looking at me, pointing. Who's the thinker? And they're all loving it now, mate. Everyone's loving amaretto sours.
Yeah, and also less alcohol than a whiskey sour because amaretto has a lower proof, so you can drink more of them without getting hungover.
Yeah, exactly. I've, by the way, definitely been to some esports meetings where they did it in like a lounge setting and they're paying for everything. And I just kept saying, like, another one of these places got like 7 amaretto sours. Of course.
I mean, I very publicly like whiskey and gin a lot. I drink a lot of wine as well. So, whiskeys, I like rye whiskey a lot, and I like Islay malts, or the smokier and peatier scotches, so Islay or Island. So Bowmore is my favorite scotch, but I like Talisker as well, Kalila, Lefroy, Ardbeg. And then rye, I like Whistle Pig. I like a distillery called High West that does campfire rye, and their double rye I really enjoy in terms of cocktails. I like Sazeracs a lot because it's a rye based, and I like the kind of anise flavor, so the black licorice flavor. So I like Sazeracs that have those liqueurs or absinthe in them. I like martinis a lot. So gins in general, I like Empress 1908. What have I been drinking recently? I drink a variety of different gins. Hendrix is a really good solid. I like some of the Old Tom or barrel aged gins. I mean, I like cocktails a lot. I mean, I used to work in high end cocktail bars, and I like a ton of stuff. What I don't like, vodka. I don't like vodka. It tastes like nothing. Fuck vodka.
By the way, it's one piece of news that came out during this show, but it actually ties in. This is aged so well. Go back to the episode when you heard the Nuke Doc was becoming the coach of 100 Thieves. And I even said, considering Bjergsen's washed, he'll just insert himself. He's the starting mid laner now for fucking 100 Thieves. Happened. And I love it because, first of all, he knows how to side lane, and 2, he knows how waves are going to work. So he should just be fucking the god emperor of LCS, shouldn't he?
Who did they sign? They signed a different mid laner. Scrims must be going very badly in order for them to do this. Hold on, let me look. What's his name? Quid. That's right.
Korean
the Korean player. Yeah, the Korean player. So Scrims must be going very badly because now he's successfully, what was it, Avaloned himself?
You know what the problem is, Monty? Obviously, when he came to NA and started playing as a pro, then he couldn't stay up to the level of the status quo. You see, that's called quid pro quo.
There you go. Apparently, Quid has visa issues, which is why he's not here. So it makes sense.
I just like to believe Nuke Duck's better reinsert himself in the team. I think that's a better story.
He might be.
I'm sticking with that one.
Look, man, I don't know how good Quid's English is, so maybe that's going to be true. I have no idea, but that will be entertaining. LCS is starting later today, guys, obviously. If by the time the VOD comes out, LCS will have already started. And just so you know, Wednesdays is the new day for Summoning Insight. We moved it over from Tuesdays. BDLS is now on Tuesdays. And starting next week, we will have Power Spike on Mondays, Monty and Wolf Show on Sundays. So we have all 4 shows back for you guys. And remember to follow the Last Free Nation Culture channel, because we will have the show with me and Doa coming out next week. So tons of content, guys, more 4 Horsemen, etc. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There were a lot more questions than normal today, and we are coming up on 4 hours of this show. So we have to cut you off somewhere. So if you have questions you want repeated, just go ahead and ask them in the new channel. And we will see you guys next week.